Chapter 392. My great aunt, there's finally news of you. As soon as she received Jean Wan's call, Auntie Chen hurriedly sighed and said, Grandfather Mo called you all day yesterday, but he couldn't find you. Last night, he came to the Yew Garden, only to find that you and Mr. Mo were not there. We didn't dare to say much, and just said that you and Mr. Mo were very busy recently. But Grandfather Mo must have found something wrong between you and Mr. Mo. So he left angrily. Today, he went back to the Mo family, but he asked me to contact you and tell you to go back to him immediately. When Jean Wan saw so many calls earlier, she guessed that it must be related to Elder Mo hearing this. She felt even more guilty. After returning from America, she and Mo Jingshan had not returned to the Mo family. My studio is going to move, so I've been busy here and didn't have time to care about home. Mr. Mo hasn't returned to the Yew Garden recently. I didn't dare to tell Elder Mo about this, but it's not good to keep it a secret. Madam, you should go back to the Mo family. Elder Mo didn't find you, and he didn't even get through to Mr. Mo's phone. Elder Mo is really angry. Jean Wan immediately looked at the time. I'll take some time to go to the Mo family in the afternoon. Did grandfather say anything before he left? He didn't say anything. He only asked you to return to the Mo family. All right, I understand. For so long, Grandfather Mo had doted on her the most and spoiled her the most. After returning to China, she hadn't visited the Mo family. It wasn't that she didn't miss Grandfather Mo, but that Mo Jingshan hadn't returned, and she couldn't go back to the Mo family by herself. In the past, they were always together, and now they were alone. It would definitely arouse suspicion. After all, the Mo family didn't only have Grandfather Mo. There were also his relatives who often visited the Mo family. In order not to make Elder Mo angry for too long, Jean Wan returned to the studio to tidy up, changed her clothes, and drove to the Mo family. It took her an hour to go from Jean Lin building to the Mo family's old mansion. When she arrived, Jean Wan called Auntie Chen to reassure her. After getting out of the car, Jean Wan found that Grandfather Mo had been waiting for her in the front yard. Jean Wan put on a big smile and walked in with the boxes of tonics she had specially bought on the way. Elder Mo saw that she was alone and immediately walked out. He looked her up and down several times before glancing behind her. His face was filled with dissatisfaction and unhappiness as he asked in a heavy voice, Why didn't Jingshan come back with you? Mo Group is about to merge with Shine. He has a lot of things to do and can't leave. I just finished my work and saw so many calls on my phone, so I hurried back to see you. As Jean Wan spoke, she stepped forward and held onto Elder Mo's arm with a smile. Grandfather, people of our age are all busy. You have to understand. When you were young, you must have worked harder than us. If we don't work hard when we're young, how can we live out our remaining years as leisurely as you? Elder Mo harumphed. Don't talk to me like you're stirring honey. Last night, when I went to the Mo family, you and Jingshan weren't there. I asked Xiao Chen, and she only said that you've been busy recently. Fine, you can be busy, but you've been so busy that you haven't even come back to see this old man for several months. I'm just getting old and have one foot in the coffin, but it's not like I'm lying in it entirely. Did you have to forget this old man so early? You're destined to live for more than 100 years. Although you're angry, don't randomly curse yourself. Auntie Chen is right. We're just too busy. Jean Wan's face was full of smiles. Elder Mo snorted and stopped talking nonsense with her. After dragging Jean Wan into the front hall, the servant came in with tea, and Elder Mo still sat down without a smile. Jean Wan handed the tonic in her hand to the servant, looked around, and found that Uncle O, the butler she often saw before, was not here. She asked curiously, Where is Uncle O? Why don't I see him? He fell and hurt his leg. He won't come back until 2 months later, Elder Mo said grumpily. Elder Mo grumpily said, Now that he's injured, there's no one at home to play chess with me. You and Jing Shun went out for so long, and now that you're finally back, you didn't even mention to visit me at the Mo home. Seeing Elder Mo grumbling like an old child who didn't get candy, Jean Wan held back her laughter, squatted by his leg, and eagerly massaged his leg, saying, It's all our fault. In the future, Even if Jingshan is too busy to come back, I'll definitely come back to accompany you. Humph. Elder Mo harumphed again and turned his head away. This time, the old man had an unhappy expression on his face. Jinwan continued to massage his leg. All right, Grandpa, don't be angry. I know I'm wrong. I'll think of you every day. After being coaxed by her for a long time, Elder Mo relaxed and looked down at Jinwan, whose eyes were curved with a smile. Is there any problem between you and Jingshan? Jinwan forced a smile. What problem can we have? Elder Mo looked at her steadily, reached out to press Jinwan's hand that had been hammering his leg, and patted the back of her hand with his wrinkled hand. Child, if you've been wronged, you must tell me. I know. I'll tell you if there's anything. Don't worry. We're fine. Did you spend the New Year's Eve with Xiaozhe when you were in Los Angeles a few months ago? Yes. You've met Jingshan's mother? I've met her. She's a very good person and treats me very well. Grandpa, you really don't have to worry about us. No matter where you are, we're fine. As long as you're healthy, it's fine. As Jinwan spoke, she removed her hand and raised her head to look at him. Grandpa, you've heard of the saying, having an elder at home is like having a treasure. You're our treasure. No one dares to forget you. Elder Emma watched as Jinwan raised her head to look at him like an adorable little deer. He smiled and reached out to pat her head. As expected, my granddaughter-in-law is the most considerate. It's said that girls are like little cotton-padded jackets. If you and Jingshan can quickly give me a granddaughter, I'll probably be happy to live for another 20 to 30 years. Then you can accompany us for another few decades. With an old treasure like you at home, others can only be envious. Elder Mo's mood was greatly improved by her words. He picked up the tea and took a sip. He had Jinwan stop squatting and quickly sit down. Chapter 393. Grandfather Mo snorted. During the new year, these people did come, but I drove them away. Why did you drive them away? It'll be more lively with these people at home. Nonsense. They're all glib-tongued, and don't speak a word of truth. When they see me, they fight with each other openly and covertly. I'm not their grandfather or father. I'm just Mo. If they want a piece of my pie, they have to ask me if I agree. They come here all day to flatter me. They might as well deal with their own family affairs. They have no ability at all. They've learned to cling to the Mo family's thighs since they were young. I'm too lazy to entertain them anymore. With that, Grandfather Mo suddenly remembered something. By the way, during the new year, there's one more thing. I have an old friend in South Africa, whose family runs a jewelry business. Not long ago, they discovered the world's largest and most complete 10-carat blue diamond. At that time, you and Jingshan were in Los Angeles. Because Jingshan had talked to South Africa before, I knew he wanted to give you a unique gift, so I left the blue diamond for Jingshan. It's in your room. Wait a minute. I'll bring it out for you. Jinwan paused and hurriedly got up to follow him. Grandpa, you? Grandfather Mo had gone out of the front hall and excitedly asked the servants to help him upstairs to fetch it. Not long after, Grandfather Mo came back with a velvet box and handed it to Jinwan. Come on, open it. Jinwan still looked at Grandfather Mo in surprise, and then at the envious servants around her. After thinking for a while, she opened the box. The blue diamond in the box was very big. It shone brightly under the light of the front hall, and was incredibly beautiful. And it was really a very complete round blue diamond. It was not deliberately designed to be a water drop, a heart, or any other popular shape. It was a complete round, but it was the most valuable and complete diamond shape among the blue diamonds. Jinwan didn't know much about jewelry, but she knew that blue diamonds were very rare and more expensive than any diamond in the world, not to mention such a pure and complete round blue diamond. Such a diamond was worth at least hundreds of millions. Grandpa, this is too expensive. Jinwan was about to quickly put the box back on the table when the old man glared at her. He glared at her until she withdrew her hand. It doesn't matter if it's expensive or not. It's not like the Mo family can't afford it. Besides, I didn't reserve this blue diamond. Jingshan had long noticed that you rarely wore rings after you got married. Those big and small wedding rings were too restrictive. Perhaps you wouldn't like them. He had intended to give this blue diamond to you a long time ago, But he had been waiting for the rarest and most complete one. Now that he had finally found one, how could he not give it to you? A few months ago, you weren't in Haicheng. When they delivered the blue diamond, I accepted it on your behalf. You can take it as a gift from the Mo family. It's a token of my sincerity. And it's also a token of Jingshan's sincerity. My best granddaughter-in-law deserves the best diamond. Hearing that it was something Mo Jingshan had ordered a long time ago, Jinwan's hand paused. It's fine if you don't like the wedding ring. But this blue diamond was personally ordered by Jingshan. You can't possibly refuse it. The old man smiled as he spoke. This is a blue diamond that hasn't been processed. If you think it's too big and can't find an occasion to wear it, you can just put it away. Isn't it said that women need more jewelry to have a sense of security? You silly girl, you don't even want the jewels and diamonds I gave you. Grandpa, the Mo family is my safest haven. Why would I need these worldly possessions to find a sense of security? But this is really too expensive. Jinwan opened the box and glanced at it. Such a big one. The price of it is probably enough to open several companies in Haicheng. Elder Mo smiled until his eyes narrowed. You're quite knowledgeable. Anyway, the Mo family doesn't lack money. Since I'm giving it to you, I'm giving it to you. If you really don't want it, go talk to Jing Shun and see if he can help you turn this diamond into a few companies for you to play with. Jinwan heard the teasing in his words and immediately became embarrassed. Grandpa, I'm very serious about my studio. No matter if it's the studio or the company, I can't just play around. I know. It's just that you, this child, could have stayed at home and lived a comfortable life as a rich wife. But you insisted on opening a studio and even took on so many contracts. How good do you think it is in the business world? Aren't you the one who has to suffer? At first, I thought you were just playing around. Later, I found that you were indeed too serious. But why do you have to work so hard? Jinwan smiled and did not explain further. It was already very late when she left the Mo family. Jinwan drove past the Mo Corporation and stopped for a while in the square opposite. She raised her eyes to look at the floor-to-ceiling windows on the top floor of the Mo Corporation. From here, she could accurately find the location of Mo Jingshan's CEO office. She could also see the lights in his office. Looking in the direction of the light, she reached out to pick up the velvet box on the passenger seat, opened it, and saw the round blue diamond that still shone brightly in the dark car. Such a perfect circle seemed to be a route that could never be taken wrong. After all, it was a circle. No matter which angle it went, which side it went, it would eventually return to the starting point and would never deviate from the original route. Such a perfect shape, in her hand, was repeatedly rubbed by her fingers. After lingering outside the Mo Corporation for a long time, Jinwan finally got out of the car. It was already late. Most of the staff in the Mo Corporation building had gotten off work, and some were working overtime. There were several offices on each floor with lights on. Jinwan went to the top floor. Shinmu guessed that at this time, he had also gotten off work. The office on the top floor was very quiet, and there were few people in the secretary's office and assistant's office. Only a man in his 30s with glasses came out of the water closet. When he saw Jinwan, he froze for a moment, and then asked Jinwan respectfully and politely, "Are you Mrs. Mo?" Jinwan gave him a strange look. "Do you know me?" "Hello. I'm the secretary-manager of CEO Mo. My surname is Ku," the man said to her with a smile. "When I was hired as the secretary, Special Assistant Shin showed me your photo. He said that if you came to the company, there was no need to make an appointment or inform us. You could come in directly." Chapter 394. Secretary Ku pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose very seriously. It's not easy to be a secretary in these multinational companies. The workload is so heavy, and there are more and more male secretaries. Besides, there are both men and women in the secretarial office. The more detailed work is done by the female secretaries, and the more complicated work, such as CEO Mo's frequent business trips, is handled by a male secretary like me. The division of labor is very clear. Jinwan smiled because of his words. In fact, she was not surprised by the male secretary. Of course, she knew that there were many male secretaries now, And this position could be held by both men and women. Sometimes men could do more things than women. And of course, the workload was also greater. She was surprised that the position of secretary-manager had been vacant for so long. But in the end, he chose a male secretary. She used to be jealous, wondering if he would have another beautiful female secretary by his side. But in the end, it was actually, "Mrs. M.O., are you here to see COMO? He is in the office. You can go directly to him," Secretary K said as he poured water in the water room. "I'm not in a hurry. What are you doing?" CEO M.O. discussed several projects with Shine in the United States last night. After all, there is a time difference between China and the United States. He was busy all night and didn't rest during the day. Now he has to continue a conference with the United States. I'm afraid he can't stand it, so I want to make a cup of coffee for him. Secretary K looked around as he spoke. "But I don't seem to find any good coffee." Jin-won looked at the cup in his hand and said with a faint smile, "Don't you know that COMO seldom drinks coffee?" "I don't think so. President M.O. has been drinking coffee a lot recently. He doesn't sleep much at night. When he's busy, he relies on coffee to pass his days. Sometimes I'm afraid that his body can't take it. But President M.O. does drink a lot of coffee recently. I guess the bag of coffee that Special Assistant Shun bought has been emptied. Now the coffee in the hot water room is left here by other secretaries, not President Mo's. I don't know if he can get used to it." The smile in Jin-won's eyes faded. "You often drink coffee recently?" Secretary K nodded, and finally found the bag of imported coffee. He picked it up and looked inside. "It's empty." With that, he handed the bag to Jin-won. "This bag is enough for 2 months. CEO M.O. drank it up in less than a month." Jin-won glanced at the bag, and did not speak for a moment. Then she took the bag and said, "If there's nothing else, you can go home. I'll take care of the coffee." Secretary K knew that she was Mrs. M.O., so she didn't ask much. "In that case, I'll have to trouble you, Mrs. M.O. I'll go back to the office to work for a while. CEO Mo's workload has been very heavy recently. If possible, please persuade him not to work day and night without caring about his health. No matter how young and healthy he is, he can't work like this." "Got it." After Secretary K left, Jin-won stood in front of the water closet for a while, threw away the coffee bag in her hand, and turned to enter the elevator. She went to a porridge shop downstairs to buy a bowl of red date glutinous rice porridge, and took it upstairs. When she reached the top floor, she saw that Secretary K was still there, so she handed the porridge to him. "Take this to COMO." Secretary K immediately smelled the porridge, and looked at Jin-won with bright eyes. "The red dates and glutinous rice are good for the stomach. But Mrs. M.O., aren't you going in? Didn't you come to see COMO? I won't go in and disturb him. You don't have to say that I bought this porridge." Jin-won said and smiled at him again, her attitude calm and unperturbed. Although Secretary K was dutiful, he didn't know as much as Shin-moo about the relationship between Jin-won and M.O. Jingshin. Hearing Jin-won's words, he nodded and turned to walk to the CEO's office. 5 minutes later, Secretary K came out and took out the bowl of porridge in his hand. Jin-won was about to leave, but she still hesitated in the corridor for a long time. When she looked back, she saw Secretary K coming out. "Mrs. M.O., why don't you take it in?" Secretary K was a tall man. He held the bowl in one hand, and pushed up the glasses on the bridge of his nose with the other. He said in frustration, "I asked COMO to eat some porridge before he started working, but he didn't even pay attention to me. He even asked me to take out the porridge and pour it out." Jin-won narrowed her eyes. "Did you tell him that I bought this porridge?" "How did you know?" Secretary K coughed and looked embarrassed. Jin-won resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "Why did you tell him?" "I was afraid that CEO M.O. wouldn't drink it. I thought that since you bought it, he would know your good intentions and drink some. But who knew that he would ask me to take it out and throw it away?" Secretary K said with a wronged expression. Seeing Jin-won didn't speak, Secretary K pushed the porridge in front of her again. "Why don't you go in and have a try?" Why should she try? If she went in, the porridge would not be as simple as being thrown away. Secretary K didn't notice Jin-won's expression. He stuffed the porridge into her hand and pointed to the secretary's office. I was sorting out the contract just now, and there are still some parts that haven't been sorted out. I'll leave the porridge to you, Mrs. Mo. I'll go back first." With that, Secretary K slipped back to the secretary's office. Jean Wan stood outside the door of the CEO's office, looking at the bowl of porridge in her hand that could be thrown away at any time, and fell into a dilemma of hesitation. If she didn't take it in, the bowl of porridge would be cold. After hesitating for a moment, Jean Wan raised her hand and knocked on the door, but there was no response. She pushed the door open and walked in. As soon as she entered, she shivered. Although it was -30 degrees outside at night, the air conditioner in this office was too cold. Glancing at the 18 degrees displayed on the air conditioner, Jean Wan glanced at the man behind the desk, and then turned around to look for the remote control of the air conditioner. The air conditioner in his office wasn't the integrated kind, but a separate one. After finding the remote control, she raised the number of the air conditioner, turned her eyes, and stared fixedly at the man who was staring at her without a word because she came in. The temperature in the office gradually rose, and it was neither too hot nor too cold. Jean Wan was still dressed in the white t-shirt and jeans she had been wearing for the past few days. Her hair was tied loosely behind her head, and she wore no makeup. Her brows were as calm as ever, her eyes dark and bright, and her skin fair. She never liked to put on makeup, and her facial features were beautiful. At this moment, she was no longer as tentative and careful as before. There was no smile on her face. Holding the porridge bowl in both hands, she walked over and put the bowl on his desk. Chapter 395. Mo Jingshan glanced at her expressionlessly. Obviously, he had no intention of eating it. Jean Wan stood in this familiar office. The man in front of her was no longer as gentle as he used to be. He exuded obvious alienation and indifference. Jean Wan could see his dissatisfaction from his eyes, so she smiled knowingly. "Don't get me wrong. I'm not here to pester you, CEO Mo. You can think of it as the person in charge of my small studio. After you invested 200 million yuan in our studio, I came here to curry favor with you. Just think about it from another perspective." With that, she suddenly turned and walked to his break room. "Eat your food. I'll go to your break room and take away all the clothes you bought for me in the wardrobe." Then, she walked straight in without looking back. She acted as if she were just passing by his office. The break room was still the same. It was silent. She turned on the light, and the cold-toned, completely masculine break room was in front of her. Jean Wan went straight to the wardrobe and opened it. Sure enough, she saw that so many clothes he had prepared for her were still here. If a person really hated another person, he would hate even the slightest trace of the other person. After he was done with his work in the company, he would live here. Recently, he had also lived in the company for a long time, but none of her things had been thrown away. They were all intact, and even neatly placed in the closet. Jean Wan was not in a hurry to take away her things. She took a step back, retreated to the bed, sat down, and looked up at the clothes in the wardrobe. The office outside the door was very quiet. She didn't know whether Mo Jingshan had eaten porridge or not, but Secretary K said that he had been busy all night. If he really refused to accept her kindness, she could only call Shinmu and ask him to contact a nearby hotel to send some food over. Now Jean Wan did whatever she wanted. After calling Shinmu, regardless of whether Mo Jingshan would eat or not, she just sat on the bed and stared at the clothes in the wardrobe. The air conditioner in the office had been adjusted to the most comfortable temperature by Jean Wan. Mo Jingshan looked at the bowl of porridge placed alone on the desk. After a long while, he put down the pen in his hand and rubbed between his eyebrows. Then Mo Jingshan received a call from the United States. "CEO Mo, Su Zhilang committed suicide in prison. Fortunately, we found her in time and barely saved her life when she was sent to the hospital. But the medical conditions in prison are too poor. She coughed up blood yesterday and kept asking to see you or call you." The man put down his hand that was rubbing between his brows. There was no joy or anger in his words. His calm voice carried a chilling indifference. "What? Has the LAPD become so indecisive that they can't even control a person who's trying to make trouble inside? Do you still need me to show up?" This The man on the other side of the phone was covered in a cold sweat. CEO Mo, the Su family can't save her now, but Su Jilin said she used to be your fiancé. I think she's spoiled and can't stand the suffering inside. She has lost a lot of weight and keeps asking to see you every day. If it were someone else, we'd deal with it the same way. But after all, she used to be with you. Mo Jingshan's tone was indifferent. For such an unruly person inside, deal with her the way you do. But in her current state, if she dies here one day, we're afraid. Don't tell me anything about this Miss Su in the future. Whether she lives or dies, it's her own fault. It has nothing to do with anyone else. After hanging up the phone, Mo Jingshan turned his eyes to the door of the lounge. Jinwan had been in there for a while, but she didn't come out. A moment later, the man got up, opened the door and walked in. Stepping into the cool-toned lounge, he saw the woman who had just seriously said she would come in to take away her clothes, only to fall asleep on his bed. Seeing that she had been sitting at the end of the bed, and then lay back to sleep, the man walked around the big bed, walked unhurriedly to the window, and drew the curtains with his left hand, covering all the lights and neon lights outside. Then he turned his eyes to the open wardrobe, where her clothes were hanging safely, occupying half of the space. He didn't feel it was an eyesore when he lived here every day, but now that the woman had checked them, Mo Jingshan finally felt something was wrong. He was about to take the clothes out of the wardrobe, but as soon as his hand touched one of them he paused. With a bang, the man closed the wardrobe door. When he closed it, his hand was still empty, and he didn't take off any clothes. Jinwan didn't expect that she would fall asleep in Mo Jingshan's office. She was going to pack up her clothes, but she fell asleep while sitting. After waking up, she closed her eyes for a long time before she had the courage to open them. She moved and found that she was still in the position of lying at the end of the bed. Her legs were hanging behind the end of the bed, and because of this position, they were a little numb. Hiss, she made a small sound. It was very light, but in the quiet lounge, it was particularly obvious. The man standing tall in front of the window turned around. You're awake. Jinwan was startled. She didn't expect him to be here. She turned her head and saw the man standing not far away. He had one hand in the pocket of his trousers. He was still wearing the same flawless trousers and shirt from last night. He was standing there with his back to the morning sun shining through the window. He lowered his head and looked at her indifferently. Standing against the light, he seemed to be gilded with a layer of gold, but she couldn't see his expression. Looking at him like this, Jinwan was in an indescribable trance for several seconds. However, when she was in a trance thinking that he was still her Mo Jingshan, the man gave her a faint smile, but his smile was too cold. Although you want to play the warm card in front of me, you have to remember clearly that I haven't lost my memory. I don't need you to remind me of all the beauty and warmth that happened in the past. It's a waste of time and emotion to touch me in this way. He might as well not speak and just stand here. She could still have a sweet dream. His words shattered her dream again. Jinwan closed her eyes, opened them again, sat up, raised her hand to rub her hair, and said tiredly, I've been doing manual work in the new office building these days. I didn't expect that I could fall asleep sitting here. When she said this, she seemed to be mocking herself. Mo Jingshan, if you don't speak, you're really beautiful and pleasing to the eye, but now as soon as you speak, you directly poke at my heart. Really? She smiled. Don't you think so? Chapter 396. Jinwan sighed. Although she had a good sleep, her legs were still a little numb. She hammered her legs and looked up at him. I'll pack my clothes in a minute. It's already dawn. Did you stay up all night? Is it because I took up your break room, or I'll find time to rest when I'm tired? His words had cut off all her concern. Forget it. She wouldn't argue with him. Jinwan got up, opened the wardrobe, and began to pack her clothes without a word. She took them off one by one and threw them on the bed behind her, saying, I'll ask someone to send me a suitcase later. You bought so many clothes for me. I can't take them away without a suitcase. The man didn't speak. It took Jinwan more than 10 minutes to take out half of the women's clothes in the wardrobe. Then she fixed her eyes on the shirts inside, suddenly raised her hand, pulled off several shirts, and threw them hard on the bed. She turned to see Mo Jingshan's deep eyes staring at the shirts, as though he was deep in thought. I've also worn these shirts of yours. More than once I've swaggered around here in your shirts. Now that I'm packing up, I'll take these shirts away with me. Jinwan turned her face away from him and stared at the shirts. The man was silent for a moment, turned his head to look out of the window, and said indifferently, "Up to you." Jinwan pursed her lips, suddenly turned around, pulled out 2 suits from the wardrobe, and threw them on the bed. When the man left the window and walked out coldly without looking at her, she said to his back, "I've worn these coats before." The man grunted, opened the door of the break room and walked out. Damn it. He didn't react at all. Jinwan wanted to run out and say, "I've slept with this man many times. Shall I take this man with me?" But reason held her back, telling her that enough was enough. Right now, Mo Jingshan was much more stubborn than her. If she really did something too irrational, who knew what would happen to him? She called Xia Tian, and Xia Tian would pick her up with a suitcase. Jinwan washed up in the break room, dried her hair, and changed her clothes. When she walked out of the break room, she saw Shenmu entering the office. When he saw Jinwan, he habitually nodded to her in greeting. Jinwan waved at him as though nothing had happened. On the contrary, Mo Jingshan remained expressionless. Jinwan glanced at his desk. The porridge bowl was gone, and the food that she had asked Shenmu to send over last night was also gone. Someone must have taken it away. She didn't know if Mo Jingshan had eaten it or not, but the chances of him eating it were very slim. Xia Tian had promised Jinwan to pick her up, but she didn't tell Jinwan that she had set a new cooperation plan with BGY Group yesterday. On the day of the meeting, she had also arranged a dinner with their general manager, Mr. Vince. The next afternoon, when Jinwan was about to get off work, Xia Tian suddenly mentioned such a dinner party. Jinwan was baffled. "Didn't you say that the cooperation plan is set for next month? Why is it so sudden? Anyway, this deal can't escape from our hands. That Mr. Vince also wants to curry favor with you, so he gave us the plan in advance. We'll just sign the contract a month in advance." Xia Tian winked at her. "You have to go to this dinner party tonight. If you dare to screw me up, I'll resign in front of you." Jinwan. In the past, when she and BGY often worked together, she had a lot of contact with that Mr. Vince. However, after learning about the flowers, she almost cut off contact with Mr. Vince. She thought that the other party was very sensible and understood her attitude, so he didn't pester her. However, this time, instead of sending flowers, she gave them the plan she had planned in advance. Although it wasn't the first time that Jinwan had gone through the back door, the feeling of being forced to do something beyond her own abilities was really uncomfortable. This clearly made her owe Mr. Vince a favor. Jinwan glared at Xia Tian. Xia Tian narrowed her eyes and smiled at her. Her expression was as though saying, "Since this great aunt wants to help you find a second spring, you have to go whether you want to or not." That night, Jinwan was dragged to this dinner party by Xia Tian. Although it was called a dinner party, it was nothing more than eating, drinking, and talking about cooperation projects in a high-end hotel. After the dinner, they couldn't leave immediately, so they found a nearby entertainment club to drink and sing. Every time they met, it was the same. Dinner parties were nothing more than eating, playing cards, drinking, or doing something more in-depth. People in the business world knew these things too well, and were familiar with many things. However, there were many upright people who simply took advantage of such an occasion to promote their relationship, business, and cooperation. The dinner party that Jinwan participated in was already very high-end. If it were Mo Jingshan's dinner party, everyone would probably treat him like a Buddha, and no one would dare to ask him to condescend to participate in it in person. Just now, because of the spicy food, Jinwan's stomach was not feeling well, so she didn't eat much. After arriving at the club, when everyone was having a good time, Jinwan took a stack of matcha cakes and a glass of red wine to fill her stomach. As soon as she took a few bites, Mr. Vince came straight to her and sat down next to her. Jinwan couldn't help but put down the glass and cake in her hand and said politely, "Sorry, I didn't eat much just now, so I'm a little hungry." "You should eat. What's there to be embarrassed about?" Mr. Vince smiled and sat next to her, looking at her plain appearance. Unlike other women who specially dressed up in a dinner party, she was so simple and casual that he wondered if he could smell the clean scent of shower gel and shampoo on her when he held her. Seeing Jinwon didn't talk much as usual, he said, "I heard that you used to eat spicy food. What's wrong with you today? Is your stomach uncomfortable?" "Well, I'm a little uncomfortable." Jinwon smiled politely at him and didn't explain too much. She moved aside another centimeter unobtrusively, trying to keep a distance from him. Chapter 397. Jinwon smiled politely. "Thank you. 1 cup is enough for me." At this moment, Mr. Vince's secretary also sat down. The secretary was very young and most likely had a good impression of the handsome, rich, and young Mr. Vince. When she sat down, her gaze landed on Jinwon's ring finger. Looking at her clean and slender fingers, she asked with a smile, "If I remember correctly, Miss G, you've been married for a long time, haven't you? Why haven't I seen you wearing a ring when we've seen you with our general manager?" Jinwon lowered her head, forked another piece of matcha cake, and fed it into her mouth. After swallowing, she glanced at the secretary and said mildly, "You're thinner than when you got married, and your finger bones are too thin. I can't wear the ring, so I left it at home." "Why? Is it strange not to wear a ring after getting married?" "Of course it's not strange. It's just that I've never seen you wear a ring, nor have I seen you and Mr. Mo appear at the same time. Those who don't know might think that you're no longer together, or that Miss G deliberately let others think that you're single, so that it's convenient for you to go out and socialize." The secretary looked at her face and only smiled. Back when Miss G and Mr. Mo got married, many girls in High City were heartbroken. I don't know why Miss G couldn't get over it. Instead of staying at home, she insisted on starting her own business. Her words were nothing more than reminding Mr. Vince beside her that Jinwon was a married woman, and her husband was Mo Jingshin, whom he absolutely could not afford to offend. Mr. Vince couldn't possibly be unaware of this, and this secretary was clearly taking the opportunity to remind him. Jinwon did not speak. She had no interest in the 2 people beside her, so these undercurrents between others were meaningless to her. "Last time, I heard from your assistant that Miss G. It seems that you've been very close to the bosses of various partners recently. You've been so busy dealing with them that you didn't even have time to accept our manager's invitations. It's really not easy to see Miss G today, but Miss G seems to be absent-minded. It seems that you're determined to win BGY's cooperation proposal and aren't taking it seriously at all." Jinwon did not raise her eyes. She said mildly and indifferently, "Isn't the most appropriate display of seriousness after discussing the contract and the progress of the cooperation more important? Wasn't all the smiling faces before signing the contract just an earnest greeting? We're all old acquaintances, and it's not the first time we've cooperated. You should know the efficiency of our studio and the price of the purchase price. Why do you still need to do so much?" As for saying that Jinwon didn't have time to accept Mr. Vince's invitation, it was true that Jinwon told Xiaoba to say so, but to say that Jinwon was busy dealing with the bosses of other partners. Haha. Jinwon smiled without saying anything. Jinwon's expression remained cold and disdainful. The secretary was about to say something when Mr. Vince said coldly, "Are you drunk today? You've only had a few drinks and you're already talking nonsense?" The secretary was stunned. She knew her boss's temper very well. She was unhappy and wanted to come over to mock Jinwon, but when she heard this warning, she did not dare to say anything more. She took the opportunity to get up and walk away, but she still glanced at Jinwon from time to time, as if she was afraid that Mr. Vince and Jinwon would have any ambiguous relationship or further intimacy. She finally quieted down, but Jinwon still looked indifferent. Mr. Vince handed her a stack of cake next to him. "Don't mind." Jinwon smiled and took the cake. "It's nothing. People like you never lack admirers and suitors. Such a secretary is just one of them. It's not like I haven't seen this kind of secretary before. Of course, I don't mind." Mr. Vince raised his eyebrows. "Then how many admirers and pursuers do you have around you?" Jinwon's hand paused on the fork, and turned to look at Mr. Vince. At the moment they looked at each other, Xia Tian suddenly raised her cell phone and took a photo of the two of them. Jinwan paused and turned to look at Xia Tian with a jerk. But Xia Tian proudly held up her cell phone and shook it at her. Seeing her secretly pleased expression, Jinwan knew that she was up to no good. Besides, Xia Tian had been very hostile to Mo Jingshan recently. She didn't know what Xia Tian would do if she took a photo that could easily be misunderstood. She quickly got up. I'm going to talk to Xia Tian. I'll call someone else to come and drink with you later. I'll leave you. Jinwan's face was cold when she got up. This was not the first time that Mr. Vince had met her. He knew that she was not as reckless as other female leaders of companies. But this was indeed the Jinwan he knew. Mr. Vince didn't say much. He smiled and moved his legs to let her pass, without any intention of chatting or pestering her. He was a gentleman. If he hadn't been a gentleman, Jinwan would have given up the cooperation with BGY Group and wouldn't have come to this kind of social event. Jinwan quickly walked up to Xia Tian and reached out. Give me your cell phone. No. Xia Tian was also eating cake, protecting her cell phone as she ate. Jinwan's face was cold. Give it to me. Seeing that Jinwan was about to be angry, Xia Tian simply reached out to pull her over, let Jinwan sit next to her, and then picked up the cell phone to show her the photo. Look, the angle at which you and Mr. Vince look at each other is perfect. But there is still a gap of 10 centimeters between your shoulders. Right. As you said in the magazine last time, you didn't hug or kiss each other. So what if you took a photo? Don't you think so? Jinwan didn't speak and reached out to grab it. But Xia Tian suddenly took back the cell phone and put it back in her pocket, not letting her touch it at all. There were so many people here, so Jinwan couldn't grab it openly. She could only lean close to her and say in a voice that only she could hear. You can take it, but don't send it out. Do you hear me? Xia Tian snorted. It depends on my mood. Anyway, don't send it. Oh, then I'll send it to Mo Jingshan alone. If you want to die, send it to him. You mean if I send this kind of photo to him, he'll kill me? No, you'll probably die in my hands first. Jinwan's face was cold. Xia Tian. Chapter 398. Jinwan really did not like the occasion that Xia Tian had deliberately arranged tonight. Although it was true that the main purpose was to discuss the cooperation with BGY. From the very beginning, she had deliberately given her and Mr. Vince some space to flirt. This goal alone made it impossible for Jinwan to stay in this private room. Although she knew that Xia Tian would not be so impulsive as to randomly send out the photos, and that she only wanted to make her happy or divert her attention, Jinwan did not have much of a good impression of Mr. Vince and his secretary. After chatting with everyone for a while, Jinwan used the excuse of going out to get the drink list to get some fresh air. She picked up her bag and headed out. She had always been very clear about the matters between men and women. In her previous life, no matter how irrational she was, she would not mess around with a man she did not like. In this life it was even more so. Jinwan had just stepped out of the private room and was about to head to the front desk of the club to ask for another drink list, when she suddenly heard a woman's low cry from the corridor of the private room. Let go. I told you to let go. This voice was slightly familiar. Jinwan paused in her steps and turned to look behind her. When she heard the voice earlier, she thought it was Shi Nianj. Now that she looked back, she saw that it was indeed Shi Nianj, who was desperately trying to shake off the hands of the two men dressed in black. Shi Nianj was usually a very gentle beauty. This was the first time Jinwan had heard such a sharp voice from her. The corridor was very quiet. The people in the surrounding private rooms had already poked their heads out to look in this direction. However, everyone only glanced coldly at them before closing the door and ignoring them. Jinwan saw that the two men had lowered their heads and were saying something to Shi Nianj with cold expressions. However, Shi Nianj was frantically trying to free her hands from their hands. Her eyes were filled with hatred and panic, and even traces of fear and helplessness could be seen. Jinwan furrowed her brows. Although her relationship with Shi Nianj was not particularly deep, they were at least acquaintances. However, even if it was only for Qin Sighting's sake, She felt that she had to help Shirnianj. More importantly, in her view, Shirnianj's face was red, and the redness was somewhat abnormal. Let go. I didn't agree to your boss deal. Miss Shir, I advise you to be sensible. If you, such a young woman, want to take over Shida Group, you have to see if our boss agrees to let you take that position. Your father's company has been in the hands of our boss for a long time. Your father also intends to let you marry over. Since he has called you back from the United States, you know what he means. You can't hide from our boss after hiding for so many months. You might as well give in. The two of them didn't use too much force and didn't intend to hurt her. However, they didn't let her go and kept holding her back. Shirnianj's gaze became more and more anxious, and her breathing became heavier. It turns out that from the beginning, he planned to step on our Shir family's heads. Back then, my father shouldn't have handed most of the power in his hands to him. What boss? Didn't he take advantage of our cooperation to devour everything of the Shir family step by step? Now, he's using something that belongs to me to challenge me. Who gave him the right to do so? Who gave him the courage? Do you think you can disregard the law just because your family is powerful? Miss Shir, you'd better be rational. Go in and have a good talk with our boss. I told you to go away. Shirnianj said angrily. Let go. Let go of me. If you don't let go, I'll really call the police. Miss Shir, go away. Miss Shir, you'd better come in with us quickly. If the boss is angry, you won't have a good ending either. Let go. Don't touch me. Jinwon walked over and said coldly, Gentlemen, I'm sorry. Just now I didn't know what was going on here. I saw someone shouting to call the police, so I called the police. I don't know if it will cause you any trouble, but the police station is not far from here. The police are already on their way. She spoke as if she had accidentally called the police, but her tone was cold and full of warning. The two men finally let go of Shirnianj's hand, but they obviously looked at Jinwon unhappily, despising her for being a busybody. Jinwon walked over and stood in front of Shirnianj. Seeing the abnormal blush on her face, she felt that she seemed to have been drugged. She wanted to escape, but was stopped by the two men. Miss Shir. At this time, one of the two men looked at Shirnianj with a cold expression and said very vaguely, I advise you to go with us. I'm afraid nothing good will happen to you in your current situation. After all, our boss is an old acquaintance of yours. If you meet a stranger like this. Shirnianj's hand trembled as she raised it and grabbed Jinwon's wrist. Jinwon felt the heat on her wrist. Sure enough, she guessed right. She must have been drugged. No need. I'll stay here with her and wait for the police to come. Shirnianj's voice trembled slightly, but her tone was extremely firm. Hearing that she was also threatening them with the police, the two men hesitated and finally gave her a warning look. Miss Shir, you'd better behave yourself. If you leave like this today, if our boss is unhappy, we can't guarantee the future of Shida Group. Feeling the stiffness in Shirnianj's hand, Jinwon subconsciously held Shirnianj's hand, lest she really made an irrational choice when she was not sober and irrational. The two men stared at them for a while. Seeing that Jinwon was going to stick her nose into other people's business, they turned and left unhappily. When the two men walked away and entered a private room, Jinwon took the opportunity to help Shirnianj into the bathroom not far away. Miss Shir, are you all right? Shirnianj forced a smile. I'm fine. Are you not feeling well? Or, Jinwon raised her hand to feel the temperature of her face. Did you drink something dirty? Shirnianj was a little embarrassed. She hesitated before answering. The thing I drank was indeed drugged. I don't know much about the medicinal properties of this thing. I'm really not feeling well now. I'm sorry, Miss G. Can you send me back to the hotel now? I'm afraid I can't go on my own now. All right, I'll send you. There were many hotels near this entertainment club. Since Shirnianj said so, she probably lived nearby. Chapter 399. Of course, she didn't mean to send Shirnianj to Qin sighting like this, which was no different from sending a sheep into a tiger's mouth. But in her impression, the only person related to Shirnianj seemed to be Qin sighting. Not to mention the two of them were emotionally involved. I'm afraid you can't go back to your room like this. I'll call Dr. Qin. or I'll take you to the hospital. Shirnianj didn't seem to hear Jinwan's words. Her body was hot, her cheeks were red, and her eyes were blurred. She staggered against Jinwan's side. Seeing that she didn't hear her clearly, Jinwan helped her steady and was about to walk out of the club when she saw a young man coming out of the private room the two men had entered. The man was a well-known figure in High City. Jinwan seemed to have brushed past him at a banquet. She only had a very faint impression of him, but he seemed to have a very subtle relationship with Shida Group. The man glanced in this direction. To avoid getting into trouble, Jinwan quickly took Shirnianj to hide behind the corner. When the man looked away again, she took Shirnianj and carefully slipped out of the club along the crowd in front of the door. Let's go. I'll take you to the hospital. Jinwan also drank some wine tonight and couldn't drive. She helped Shirnianj to the roadside to stop a taxi. Shirnianj was probably really confused and irrational. Following by Jinwan's side, she nodded in panic and then shook her head. After helping her into the taxi, he told her the address of High City Central Hospital. He then raised his hand to grab Shirnianj's hand that was about to pull open her clothes. He picked up his phone with the other hand and hesitated for a moment. He then glanced at the male driver in the taxi. The driver kept glancing at the rearview mirror, as though he had noticed that Shirnianj's condition was not right. Two women, one of whom had been drugged and looked seductive, faced the male driver who looked strong and strong. Jinwan secretly sent a text message to Qin Sighting with her cell phone, but she didn't know when he would see it. Dr. Qin, are you in the hospital? Shirnianj was drugged and is now with me. Should I take her to the hospital, or do you want to come to a nearby hotel? Less than a minute after the message was sent, Qin Sighting called. What the hell are you texting? Qin Sighting's tone was cold. Obviously it was because she was talking about Shirnianj, but even if it sounded cold, didn't he immediately call back? These duplicitous men were really in need of a lesson. Miss Shir is with me right now. Are you coming? Jinwan only asked, but her eyes were wary of the male driver, who kept glancing at them. Qin Sighting was silent for a moment. Jinwan glanced at the driver's license plate and license plate number on the front of the taxi. I'm on Luing Road right now. The taxi I took is High AR 589X. Are you going to rush over yourself? Or should I bring someone over to look for you? The driver's eyes were originally fixed on Shirnianj, who was clearly drugged. When he suddenly heard Jinwan tell him the license plate number of the taxi, he immediately calmed down, withdrew his gaze from the rearview mirror, and drove seriously, not daring to have any other thoughts. Qin Sighting clearly heard the caution in Jinwan's words. Luing Road was not far from the hospital. He said coldly, I just finished an operation. Send her to the hospital first. When they finally arrived at the hospital, Jinwan helped Shirnianj out of the car. Although it was already dark, there were many people in front of the hospital. Shirnianj's breathing was heavy, and her face was too red. When they entered the hospital, they did not make much noise, but they still attracted attention. It was not until they entered the elevator that it became quieter. After entering the hospital, Shirnianj seemed to have figured out where she was. She was clearly uneasy, staring at the numbers on the elevator in a daze. I'm not sure if it's appropriate to send you to Dr. Qin. Right now, if you're still awake, you can refuse. I can send you to the hotel immediately, Jinwan said softly. Shirnianj leaned against her. Her hot breathing and increasingly heavy breathing made her look very uncomfortable. At this moment, she suddenly smiled and said hoarsely in a low voice, It's not that I haven't slept with him, but looking at me now, I'm afraid the only way he can help me is to give me a tranquilizer. He won't do anything like what you think. Jinwan did not speak anymore, holding her steadily with her hand. Although she did not ask more, she remembered that Nan Heng had said that Shirnianj had gone to America 4 or 5 years ago. Shirnianj was 2 years older than Jinwan. In the months after returning to China, the relationship between her and Qin Sighting had clearly not eased. If they had really slept together, could it be that when she was 17 or 18, she and Qin Sighting Shirnianj did not know if she was really confused by the drug? She leaned against Jinwan's side, saying hoarsely and softly, Back then, before I returned to America, I got him drunk and fell on him. After I raped him, I patted my butt and left. I've been gone for so many years." She smiled as she spoke, but there was loneliness in her eyes. At that time, I was indeed young and impetuous, and I was indeed too selfish. When I chased him, I was so passionate, and when I left, I was so resolute and thorough. It's understandable that he hates me. Jinwon. What could she say? She could only say that it was already very impressive that Shirni-Anj had the courage to tear Dr. Chin's clothes. She could even rape a grown man. She could only give her a thumbs up. Impressive, impressive, really impressive. When they arrived at the floor where Chin Sighting's consulting room was located, Jinwon directly led them over. Chin Sighting had just finished an operation and was probably in the ward telling the patient's family something. There was no one in the consulting room. Jinwon lowered the temperature of the air conditioner so that the slightly cooler air could make Shirni-Anj feel more comfortable. Just as Shirni-Anj was helped to sit on the bed in the consulting room, the door opened. Chin Sighting was wearing a white shirt and trousers. When he entered, he only put his white coat in the crook of his arm. As soon as he came in, he saw Shirni-Anj sitting there. At a glance, he could tell that she was indeed not the same as usual. He paused and turned to look at Jinwon. "Where did you meet her?" "My studio had a dinner party tonight. We were drinking in the entertainment club downstairs of the Greenwood Hotel. She was pestered by two men in the corridor. I saw that she seemed to be in a bad condition, so I took the opportunity to take her away." Jinwon said and glanced at the time. "I'll leave her to you. I'll go first." Jinwon was about to leave. Seeing that Chin Sighting was probably not in the mood to chat with her, she said before walking out of the door. "By the way, the person who drugged her seems to be surnamed Xiao. That person has some status in High City, but I don't know much about him. I only know his surname." Chapter 400. My colleagues from the studio are still in the club. I'll take a taxi back. You don't have to worry about me. Jinwon waved at him and happily opened the door to leave. Chin Sighting glanced at the time. It was not safe for a woman like Jinwon to go out and take a taxi by herself at such a late hour. He was about to call Mo Jinxian when Shirni-Anj fell from the bed. His gaze faltered, and he rushed forward to carry her up. Jinwon walked out of the hospital and was about to take a taxi when two black Mercedes stopped in front of her. The window of one of the cars rolled down, and the man with the surname Xiao sat in the car coldly, looking at her coldly, as if a venomous snake had suddenly jumped out of nowhere, staring at her coldly and fixedly. "You know Shirni-Anj?" the man surnamed Xiao asked. Jinwon looked at him mildly. It seemed like when she came out of the club, these people had already followed the taxi all the way. They had personally seen her send Shirni-Anj to Chin Sighting's place. If she said that she didn't know him, she would only be lying to herself. No one would believe her. "I don't know her, but I've seen her a few times." Jinwon's tone was indifferent. "Earlier, Miss Shur said she wasn't feeling well and asked me to send her to Central Hospital. I took a taxi to send her here. Is there anything wrong with that?" The man surnamed Xiao lifted the corner of his lips. His voice was cold. "You sent the woman I wanted to Chin Sighting's place. Tell me, is there anything wrong with that?" He was quite direct. He didn't hide anything in his words at all. Jinwon was expressionless. "I'm sorry. I've only met Miss Shur a few times. I don't know much about her. Even if I helped her out, I only sent her to the hospital. By sending her to this hospital, you've rescued this little rabbit from my cage." The man surnamed Xiao narrowed his eyes coldly. "My rabbit is gone. Tell me, what should I do with you?" The man's words sounded extremely gentle, but if one listened carefully, they were cold and frightening. His eyes seemed to be smiling, but they were sizing her up. "Then what do you want?" Jinwon asked in return. There was no fear in her eyes. The other party watched her for a moment with a faint smile, slowly saying, "The rabbit that I've carefully raised abroad for several years has disappeared. This cage is empty, and it looks lonely. Why don't I catch another rabbit? Even if it's not the original one, at least it doesn't look too bad. Of the two famous young ladies in Haicheng, aside from Shirni-Anj, it's you, Miss G, isn't it?" The composure on Jinwon's face cracked. "You know me?" The man laughed coldly. and the back door was opened by another man who looked like a bodyguard. Miss G, if you know what's good for you, get in the car. The man surnamed Xiao looked at her. His eyes seemed to be smiling but not smiling, seemingly cold but not cold. Jinwan did not move. Her cool and quiet voice slowly came out of her mouth. Since you know me, you should know who's behind me. You dare to touch me, are you sure? The man surnamed Xiao looked at her expression that was neither afraid nor flustered and smiled coldly. His tone was indifferent as he said, the person you can't offend the most in Haicheng is not the high officials or the mayor, but Mo Jingshan. You have the Mo family behind you. Of course I know that. But the people who are afraid of the Mo family don't include me, Xiao Li. The man clearly did not intend to speak any more nonsense. The car window slowly rolled up. However, the car door in front of Jinwan remained open. The bodyguard said coldly, please get in. Jinwan still did not move. If I don't do it, are you going to use force? The bodyguard said expressionlessly. Then don't blame us for being impolite. Our CEO Xiao has always been polite to women. Don't refuse a toast and drink a forfeit. Is drugging Miss Sure considered being polite to a woman? Jinwan asked with a mocking smile. The bodyguard still said coldly. Miss Sure is just a special case. It was her father who drugged her, not our CEO Xiao. If he wants a woman, he doesn't have to do that. This kind of thing had little to do with Jinwan. She was just listening. But now it seemed that if she didn't get in the car, it would only lead to more unnecessary consequences. Even if she resisted with all her might, it would be useless. She looked around. There were no patrolling police cars. And it was already past 10 o'clock in the evening. There were fewer people in front of the hospital than before. If she rashly called the police or asked for help, her cell phone would probably be taken away. After thinking for a while, she didn't resist anymore, and obediently got in the car. Xiao Li sat in the passenger seat, and silently watched Jinwan get in the car through the rearview mirror. Jinwan didn't resist at all after getting in the car. She just pressed the bag in her hand and asked calmly, is this kidnapping or what? Can you not confiscate my bag and cell phone? Xiao Li looked back at her. Have you ever seen me kidnap someone in such a moral way? Jinwan also coldly looked at the bodyguard outside the car door, and the driver in black in the car. If this isn't kidnapping, what is it? I've made it very clear. The rabbit in my cage has run away. I have to catch another one. I'm married. Why do you want to catch a married woman? That's not necessarily the case. You rabbit are more interesting. Moreover, you're very useful. At the very least, you can invite this god, Mo Jingshan, out. Was he going to use her as bait to lure Mo Jingshan out? Jinwan instinctively sat up stiffly, and was about to resist. But then she realized that she was alone in the face of 2 cars of men and bodyguards. She was afraid that she was overestimating herself. She looked at the man sitting in the passenger seat. No matter how sophisticated your kidnapping method is, it's still kidnapping. Xiao Li coldly raised his eyebrows and didn't reply. Obviously, no matter what she thought, she couldn't escape now. Since the other party didn't intend to hurt her for the time being, Jinwan didn't make too much noise in his car. Since she was already here, she might as well take things as they come. She leaned against the car door and looked out of the window. The car was air-conditioned and quiet, so she could silently feel the coldness, danger, and mystery emanating from this man surnamed Xiao. The author's words, 1. It's not that the female lead isn't decisive or decisive, but a person who has truly loved won't believe that love is gone just like that. She tried hard to fight for it, which means she didn't disappoint the one she once loved. Even if one day, as you say, she really doesn't come back, she won't feel guilty. 2. When the time is right, I'll torture back. I know the pace of the plot, so I don't have to worry that I'll go astray, or that I won't be able to make up for it. 3. Releasing chapters is very tiring, especially for a stay-at-home mom like me who has a baby to take care of. It's very difficult for me to save some chapters. I have to wait for the baby to go to bed before I can squeeze out time to write. My schedule is very irregular, and I write very slowly. I'm also very envious of those who can write more than 10,000 words a day. Chapter 401. Jinwan was taken to a villa. It was a very luxurious and large villa. However, this villa was halfway up a mountain in the east of High City. It was surrounded by mountains. The environment and air seemed good, and no one restricted her freedom. However, her cell phone signal and internet connection were blocked. Moreover, there was no way she could leave this place unless she drove or took a car. Not to mention that there might be beasts on the mountain once she left the villa area. This rugged mountain road was built by them, and it was impossible for her to walk down it. Jinwon was asked to stay here for one night. There was no one inside, only a servant in her 40s or 50s who could cook. The servant was mute. In the evening, Jinwon found that the mute was not born mute, but her tongue had been cut off, and she looked horrible when she opened her mouth. Because of this, when Jinwon spoke, the mute servant could hear her. After all, she was not born deaf and mute. She was served well here. After Xiao Li personally sent her here, he only told her to stay here obediently. After being isolated here for 3 days, Jinwon finally couldn't stay calm anymore. Anyone in such a place with no signal, no internet, and no freedom, except to eat, drink, and sleep well, would collapse. Not to mention she was here with a strange servant whose tongue had been cut off. Every time the helper opened her mouth, Jinwon would be afraid. What she was afraid of was not the helper, but what kind of people these people were. To be able to forcefully cut off a person's tongue, this kind of cruel method was clearly perverted. Now they were also perverted to keep her here. On the 4th day, Jinwon couldn't sit still anymore. Several times, she wanted to go out, but the servant would pull her, saying, "Ah," and pointing to the wild forest outside the villa, meaning that it was very dangerous outside. And if she didn't leave by car, she would be in danger and couldn't go out. Jinwon could only sit in the front yard of the villa in vain, holding the cell phone that was fully charged, but had no signal. She dialed 110 again and again, dialed Mo Jingshan's number, and dialed the numbers of all the people she might know, but the call didn't go through. On the morning of the 5th day, Xiao Li came with a rabbit that he seemed to have just caught at the foot of the mountain. Covered in blood, Rabbit was dragged into the villa by the ear by a bodyguard. Jinwon hadn't slept well these days. She sat in front of the villa with dark circles under her eyes. When she saw Xiao Li come in, she couldn't help asking, "How long are you going to keep me here?" Xiao Li glanced at her expressionlessly, took the rabbit from the bodyguard's hand, and threw it in front of her. Jinwon subconsciously dodged backward. She lowered her head to look at the bloodied rabbit on the ground, and instantly felt a chill run down her spine. She raised her head to look at him. "Are you a pervert? Have you ever seen a pervert give a roasted rabbit to his prisoner?" Jinwon glanced at the dead rabbit on the ground, and took a step back. "I'm not interested in eating it." Xiao Li expressionlessly walked past her. When he entered the villa, he glanced at the breakfast placed on the dining table. Seeing that it hadn't been touched, he glanced back at Jinwon. "Miss Ji, are you not used to the food? Or are you going on a hunger strike to resist?" Jinwon looked at him up and down, saying indifferently, "You're no one to me. Even if I starve to death here, it's useless. Why do I have to resist in such a stupid way? After being locked up here like an idiot for several days, anyone would lose their appetite. I can't eat anymore." Xiao Li glanced at her again, coldly smiling. "You're quite sensible." Jinwon glanced at him. "Seeing that I'm sensible, can you tell me why you locked me up here? Such good food and drinks may seem like nothing, but this kind of mental torture is even worse. What grudge do I have with you that you have to torture me like this?" Xiao Li coldly withdrew his gaze and didn't answer her. He sat at the dining table, asked the servant to bring new tableware, and ate the breakfast specially prepared for him by the servant. As he ate, he said calmly, "Miss Ji, sit here and let's have a chat." Jinwon walked over but didn't sit down. She just stood by the dining table and kept a safe distance from him. Xiao Li didn't force her to sit down. Glancing at her guarded expression, he said indifferently, "It seems that I overestimated your position in Mo Jingshan's heart. He is indeed more ruthless and calm than I knew him. He had learned the news that you were taken away by me 5 days ago, but he still hasn't taken any action." "Really?" Jinwon's expression was very calm. "Aren't you sad or sad? During the days I took you away, Your husband didn't care about you at all. He didn't even take any action. There's nothing to be sad about. Our relationship has long been in trouble. It's normal for him to ignore me. Xiao Lui looked at her for a while and smiled coldly. Why do I feel that you want to cry? Jin Wan glanced at him coldly, and there was a lot of mockery in her eyes. Do I look like I want to cry? She obviously despised and repulsed Xiao Lui, a pervert of unknown origin, and her tone was not polite. I'm not surprised that a man who no longer loves me can be heartless to me now. I've already cried. Do I still need to cry in front of people like you? Xiao Lui casually smiled. It seems that CEO Mo really doesn't care about you. I thought he would do something in the dark, but he didn't do anything in the dark. It's clear that he doesn't even care about your life. Jin Wan glanced at the man who deliberately poked her heart with words. Oh, Xiao Lui suddenly smiled. Since Mo Jingshan doesn't want you, why don't you just marry me? Jin Wan. CEO Xiao, do you have any misunderstanding about a married woman? Me and you. Let's not talk about why I should marry you. I still have the title of Mrs. Mo. What qualifications do you have to stand in front of me and ask me to marry you? Speaking of which, we've only met once, and today is the second time we've met. Xiao Lui leaned back in the chair, his voice still cold. I told you, you gave the rabbit I raised for many years to Qin sighting. Now you're the substitute rabbit. Since you're a substitute, there's no need for any feelings. Just stay in the cage obediently. Eat whatever I tell you to eat, and do whatever I tell you to do. There's no reason. You really are a pervert. Jin Wan impatiently frowned. Since Mo Jingshan doesn't intend to save me, why do you still keep me locked up? Chapter 402. The 8th day. The summer heat persisted, but the wind in the mountain villa was very comfortable. Jin Wan calmed down and took it that she had taken some time off to spend her vacation in such a place. Xiao Lui did not come again these days, but sent someone to buy some clothes she could wear. There were many types of clothes both inside and outside. There were even swimsuits, and none of them were cheap. Perverts were indeed perverts. Even the way they kidnapped her was different from that of those fiends outside. Jin Wan took a nap and soaked herself in the pool when she got up. Anyway, there were only her and the mute helper here. Every day, she would talk to herself here. A few days ago, she was afraid that Xiao Lui would come, so she didn't dare to enter the pool. These days, she found that he probably wouldn't come again. Taking advantage of the hot weather today, she put on her swimsuit and entered the pool to kill time. Fortunately, the swimsuit was a conservative style. She stayed in the pool for a while, then climbed out, drank the lemon juice that the helper made for her, and returned to the water. It was really boring, so she practiced holding her breath in the water. She held a stopwatch and counted the time. Although she could swim, she couldn't hold her breath for too long. She still remembered that when she and Mo Jingshan fell into the sea, because of a car brake failure, she choked in the water and coughed so hard that her lungs were about to explode. She repeated this practice for 2 hours and successfully and steadily increased the time she could hold her breath by more than 10 seconds. Jin Wan swam back and forth in the water contentedly. When it was almost evening, Jin Wan swam around again, held her breath in the water for a while, and abruptly came out of the water. To her surprise, she saw a figure standing by the pool, who seemed to have been watching her for a long time. Jin Wan's face turned cold. She immediately sank into the water from head to toe, and looked warily at Xiao Lui, who had come out of nowhere. It seems that the person who was sent to buy clothes for you is not good. What kind of swimsuit did he buy? The parts that should be exposed are basically not exposed. Jin Wan raised her hand to wipe the water off her face, and pushed her wet hair back. Even though she was wearing a conservative swimsuit, she was still submerged in the water. CEO Xiao, please be more self-conscious. I've only been kidnapped here by you. There's no reason for me to reveal anything that I shouldn't reveal in front of you. Go into the villa and hide yourself. Xiao Lui casually picked up the towel on the white recliner. I'll stand here. If you want to come out, you can come out. If you don't, just soak in it. Jin Wan. Not only was he a pervert, but he was also a lunatic with terrible behavior. She had been in the pool for a long time. If she continued to soak like this, not only would her skin be damaged, but she couldn't continue to soak like this. She slowly swam over in the water. Just as Xiao Li thought she was going to come up like this, Jinwan abruptly raised her hand, grabbed the bottom corner of the towel, and yanked it down harshly. Xiao Li paused, looked down, and saw that she had wrapped the towel that had fallen into the pool around her body. Disregarding the fact that the towel was also wet, she climbed up from the side of the pool with the towel wrapped tightly around her. Xiao Li stared at her pair of long, white legs under the towel and walked over. Chapter 403. No matter how Jinwan tried to defend herself, she was still held by the waist by the other party. He leaned close to her and stared at her coldly with an unfathomable meaning. Jinwan frowned. Let go. There's water by the pool. It's very slippery. I'm afraid that Miss G will accidentally fall and leave some marks on your beautiful legs. That would be too much of a pity. Xiao Li held her waist and did not let go. He seemed to have the intention of moving his face closer. Although his eyes were extremely hateful and invasive, they still hid a trace of discomfort. Jinwan's face was full of resistance and disgust. If you want to tease a woman, you have to know who you're dealing with. I'm afraid I'm not someone you can tease. Xiao Li was indifferent to the warning and threat in her words. He deliberately sniffed the neck exposed by her bath towel. Smelling the faint cold fragrance on her body, he narrowed his eyes and said, although it's a substitute rabbit, it smells good. It's not much worse than Shirnian's. Instead, each has its own merits and charm. Jinwan's waist was held by his hand. Although they were separated by the swimsuit and towel, she still felt as though she was entangled by an ice-cold viper. She felt a chill all over her body. The smell on this man's body was not unpleasant. It was a faint smell of tobacco. She was not in the mood to smell anything else. She raised her hand with an ugly expression to block between the two of them. Let go. Xiao Li refused to let go of her waist. Since Mo Jingshan doesn't care about you at all, you might as well follow me. Miss G is the #1 socialite in High City. If you follow another man, I'm afraid no one can match you. Do you think you're worthy? Jinwan asked coldly. Her two hands were still firmly blocking Xiao Li's chest, refusing to yield even an inch. Whether I'm worthy or not, won't you know after you try? Xiao Li raised his eyebrows slightly, and the smile on his lips deepened. He leaned close to Jinwan's ear and said, Miss G, haven't you heard of the Xiao family? In terms of power and influence, the Xiao family and the Mo family have always been on par. The reason why the Xiao family isn't one of Haicheng's 4 largest families is because the Xiao family is close to Haicheng, but doesn't belong to Haicheng. Whatever Mo Jingshan can give you, I can also give. Since he doesn't have any tender feelings for the fairer sex, you might as well follow me. Perhaps you can still fly out of this cage. Jinwan sneered. Flying from one cage to another? I'm afraid only a psychopath with Stockholm Syndrome would like someone as perverted as CEO Xiao. Xiao Li completely ignored her resistance, clasped her waist tightly, and abruptly pressed Jinwan into his arms. He put his hand on her waist and bent down to smell the refreshing fragrance on her neck. Jinwan struggled with all her might, pushing him away with both hands. While they were arguing, they didn't hear the sound of a car approaching from outside. Why is it so fragrant? Xiao Li held Jinwan and had already moved up to her neck. His hands were firmly pressed against her waist to prevent her from moving away. Jinwan's hair all stood on end. She raised her foot and was about to give his lower body a hard kick to kick him away. All of a sudden, a familiar, clear voice rang from the entrance of the villa. CEO Xiao, you're putting your hands where they shouldn't be. Are you prepared to have both your hands chopped off? That voice was low, slow, and heavy, as if a thick killing intent was slowly seeping into it. Chapter 404. The moment she heard the voice, Jinwan froze. She turned to see Mo Jingshan, who had appeared in front of the door. His cold eyes fell on Xiao Li's hand, and for a moment, his black eyes narrowed dangerously, as if there was a strong killing intent hidden in them. Wasn't he indifferent? Didn't he take no action? Didn't he care about her life or death? Why did he come here? Although Jinwan's heart was stirred, She just looked coldly at the man in that direction, and didn't move. She loosened her hand that was pushing Xiao Lui away. Xiao Lui took the opportunity to hold Jin-Wan tightly in his arms, and glanced at Mo Jingshan with a faint smile. What? Mo, you came here alone? Did you ignore my bodyguards, or are you confident that you can take your wife away? Mo Jingshan's face was cold, his eyes deep, and his voice was cold. How dare you take my wife away? Jin-Wan's eyes paused. From his tone, it seemed that he knew Xiao Lui. She turned her eyes sharply to Xiao Lui, who sneered and still held her in his arms. Mo Jingshan stood in front of the door, against the light, half of his face hidden in the evening light, and said indifferently, "Let her go." Mo, you seem to be at ease leaving her with me. Why don't you leave her with me? Anyway, you don't have any tender feelings for her. And I happen to be short of a decent woman. I think Miss G is very good. With that, Xiao Lui leaned close to Jin-Wan's neck and sniffed. Mo Jingshan slowly unbuttoned the cuffs of his shirt. Without looking at Jin-Wan's complicated eyes, he said coldly, "If you want to die, just say it. I'll fulfill your wish." For a moment, Jin-Wan doubted that he didn't come to save her at all, because he appeared so casually, as if he knew this place from the beginning, but didn't show up for a whole week. Just as Xiao Lui said, he left her here. He left her here with peace of mind. There seemed to be something sinking in his heart bit by bit. Feeling the woman's sudden silence, Xiao Lui glanced down at her. It's really hurtful when a man is heartless. I'll give you one last chance. Why don't you come with me? Jin-Wan narrowed her eyes and did not speak. Xiao Lui narrowed his eyes and sneered. When I asked her this a few days ago, she refused me with a look of disgust. But when I asked her again today, she became silent. It seems that she has wavered. Mo, it's strange that a woman doesn't trust you one day. He had just finished speaking when Mo Jingshan's voice cut in. His voice was cold. Jin-Wan, come here. These days, Jin-Wan's mind was especially clear because of the quietness. She could tell that the relationship between Xiao Lui and Mo Jingshan was unusual. And even Mo Jingshan's attitude toward him was different from what she had imagined. She pondered for a moment, and withdrew from Xiao Lui's arms. When Xiao Lui coldly raised his eyebrows and turned to look at her, she didn't go to Mo Jingshan, but wrapped herself in the bath towel, and turned to walk into the villa expressionlessly. After about 10 minutes, Jin-Wan came out in clean clothes. The evening glow had faded, and the lights around the villa yard had been turned on. In the bright lights, she was running in the direction where she could finally escape, but her speed was very, very slow, until she came to Mo Jingshan's side, and stood by the man's side. She didn't say a word to him. Mo Jingshan didn't look at her but said to her, "Wait for me in the car." Jin-Wan saw his car parked outside the villa just now. There was only one car. He did come alone. So simple. She had been taken here for a week, but he didn't move. Now that he finally came, he didn't move a single soldier. He didn't even need to say much. As long as he came, she could just follow him into the car and leave? What was the relationship between him and Xiao Lui? Jin-Wan put away the thoughtful look on her face, didn't ask much, and got into the car. Xiao Lui's men didn't stop her, and the bodyguards outside just took a look at her, and made way for her. Jin-Wan felt even more strange. No matter how influential Mo Jingshan was, didn't this Xiao guy still have the guts to kidnap his woman? But in the blink of an eye, as soon as Mo Jingshan appeared, he solved the problem so easily. It seemed that everyone was just waiting for Mo Jingshan. These days, except for blocking all the news about her, they seemed to take good care of her. But what was this? Sitting in this long-lost black ghost, Jin-Wan pursed her lips tightly. Mo Jingshan had been inside for a long time. She didn't know what he was talking about, or what was going on inside. It wasn't until it was dark that Mo Jingshan finally came out. The moment the man got into the car, Jin-Wan turned to look at him. "Are you familiar with CEO Xiao?" she asked. Mo Jingshan glanced at her. "Are you curious about my relationship with CEO Xiao, or about CEO Xiao himself?" Jin-Wan gave a faint and cold smile. "Even if I'm really curious about CEO Xiao, I'm afraid you won't feel anything. After all, you left me here for a week and didn't care about me at all. My life, my safety, and how I live my life are no longer important to you." The man withdrew his gaze. "Don't bring trouble to yourself," and give me less trouble. That's the right thing to do. Whether you hate or resent me, you've lived well and rested well here this week. You look much better. I'm afraid you won't bear to go back to such a resort if I come too early. Therefore, he had already investigated the reason why she was brought here, and he knew the cause and effect of it all. But he really left her here. The car was already driving down the mountain. Jinwon suddenly said, "Stop, open the door, and let me out." She had maintained her rationality for too long, but at this moment, there was almost a sign of collapse. She clenched her hands tightly on her legs. What was the saying again? The straw that broke the camel's back. For 8 whole days, what he had been waiting for was nothing more than this final fatal strike. Mo Jingshan didn't stop the car. If you want to lose your temper or make trouble, you can do whatever you want when you go back. This mountain is far from the edge of the city, and is usually unguarded. Any fierce animal may lurk in the woods. Don't mess with me here. His meaning was clear. If she got out of the car now, she might be an unknown danger at any time. Jinwon looked at the gradually darkening sky outside the car, and didn't speak, but raised her hand to open the door. Mo Jingshan turned the central lock of the car when she was about to open the door. Hearing the door being locked, Jinwon's hand paused on the door. "Didn't I cause you trouble?" The man didn't speak. Chapter 405. After a few seconds of silence, the man abruptly stopped the car on the side of the road. His slender and powerful fingers suddenly fell on her chin, forcing her face to face with him. His eyes were deep and cold, and he repeated in a heavy tone, "I'll say it again. Don't throw a tantrum with me here." Jinwon raised her hand and swatted his hand away with force. She gave a cold smile. "Do I look like I'm throwing a tantrum? Mo Jingshan, I've pulled out all the thorns on my body and faced you naked every day. Have I ever been throwing a tantrum?" He looked into her eyes and said indifferently, "There's no need to suppress your nature to this extent. Just be yourself. It's your ability to throw a tantrum. You've been wearing a mask on your face for too long, and now you can't take it off. Are you going to blame me for it?" Jinwon looked into his eyes and gradually narrowed her eyes. "Do you want me to become the Jinwon I used to be?" Mo Jingshan pursed his lips and sneered. "Don't you know what you used to be?" Jinwon opened her mouth, paused, and suddenly said, "All right." She abruptly pushed his hand away from her chin, but failed to do so. His fingers tightened imperceptibly. "You can't get out of the car here. I'm not kidding. Don't court death here, okay? Does my life or death still have anything to do with you? No, but at least I'm not morally allowed to watch you get out of the car to court death. You're really cold, heartless, and straightforward." He withdrew his hand, no longer holding her chin, turned back to drive, and said in a low voice that did not reveal his true emotions, "I've made it clear enough. You should have seen the truth. There's no point in deceiving yourself. Mo Jingshan, do you still remember what I used to be like?" Jinwon suddenly asked him, but when she asked this, her expression was too calm. The man did not answer. It seemed that she did not intend to hear his answer at all. It was already very late when she was sent back to the Yew Garden. Jinwon came out of the bathroom, put on a nightgown, and wrapped her washed hair in a towel. She picked up the hairdryer, plugged it in, tore off the towel, and began to dry her half-wet hair. It was already 9 o'clock in the evening when Mo Jingshan sent her back to the Yew Garden. Because it was too late, he did not drive away. This was also the first time he returned to the Yew Garden since they returned. Although he did not return to the master bedroom, he was still in the previous study. Not long after, Jinwon of the house, Jinwon of the house of the family of the Yew Garden. In the past few days, it was really like being forced to take a vacation in the mid-mountain villa. She had to put down all her work, busyness, and social engagements. Her daily 3 meals were almost made according to her taste. Occasionally, there would be a new taste for her to eat. Seeing that she didn't eat it, the mute servant wouldn't force her to eat it. After that, she would cook according to her favorite taste. Unexpectedly, after a week of rest, she seemed to be in a much better state of mind. In this week, she had gained at least 3 kilograms, and her cheeks were rosy. If she hadn't been forced to the point of helplessness, Jinwan would have suspected Xiao Lui's real purpose. But now she was still suspicious of his purpose. The man surnamed Xiao often looked at her, as if there was something on her face worth looking at. But now that she had left the Yew Garden of the Yew Garden of the Yew Garden, she was not in the mood to think about whether this man was good or bad. After all, it had nothing to do with her. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Jinwan got up to open the door. Auntie Chen was holding a cup of red dates and white fungus soup in her hand. Seeing that Jinwan was still awake, Auntie Chen whispered, "Mr. Mo hasn't been back for a long time. I heard from the Mo family that he has been too busy these months and often works overtime in the company. I think he often stays up late. It's rare for him to come back, so I stewed some nourishing soup for him to eat as a midnight snack. But I saw the door of Mr. Mo's study was closed, so I didn't dare to knock on the door. Pour it out. He won't eat it." Auntie Chen paused. "But Mr. Mo, I'm tired. I'm going to rest. If there's nothing else, I'll close the door." Seeing that Jinwan really didn't intend to say more, Auntie Chen hurriedly stuffed the bowl in her hand into Jinwan's hand. "Madam, do as you see fit." Jinwan closed the door and looked at the red dates and white fungus soup in her hand. She might as well eat it herself. In the end, Jinwan knocked on the door of the study, but there was no response. Jinwan continued to knock on the door patiently. She was not in a hurry, and she knocked on the door rhythmically for a few minutes. Finally, the door of the study was opened by the person inside. The man stood in front of the door, and his indifferent eyes fell on her nightdress. His eyes were clear. "What's the matter?" Jinwan handed the bowl in her hand to him and said carelessly, "Auntie Chen made red dates and white fungus soup. She asked me to bring it to you." Not only did she say it carelessly, but she also didn't pay attention to the soup in the bowl, because she had almost drunk half of the bowl. Looking at the red dates and half a bowl of white fungus soup, the man was expressionless. "If you like it, drink it yourself. You don't need to bring the other half to me. You sound as if you will drink it even if I bring the whole bowl here." Mo Jingshan didn't answer her, nor did he block the door. This was the Yew Garden, and Auntie Chen and the other servants were mostly Grandfather Mo's spies. He didn't refuse her so coldly, and left the door open. He didn't stop her from leaving or coming in. Seeing the man turn around and go in, Jinwan saw that he was not working, but reading some translation materials. The computer on the desk was turned on, but only on the desktop wallpaper page, which meant that he just turned it on but didn't use it. Other company documents automatically printed by the printer in the study were still placed beside the computer and hadn't been signed, which meant that he was not in a hurry to sign them and that he was not busy tonight. Jinwan walked over. When the man put away the translation materials, she walked up to him and watched him put the translation materials into the bookshelf. Mo Jingshan didn't say a word, but after Jinwan looked at him with scorching eyes for a long time, he picked up the company documents beside the computer and turned to look at her before opening them. "Are you going to watch me work here? Can't I?" Jinwan tilted her head and seemed to be smiling, but there seemed to be a sharp edge in her clear eyes. Chapter 406. Jinwan stood by and watched him work. After a while, he called Shen Mu to explain some matters related to the company's documents. She watched him put down the phone and sign the documents. She watched him frown and be expressionless from time to time. Jinwan finished the half bowl of red dates and white fungus soup. She stood by and watched him while drinking the food in the bowl. After eating, she put down the bowl, wiped the water stains on the corner of her mouth with her fingers, glanced at the man's unmoved profile, raised her hand, and pressed the company document in front of him. The man paused and looked at her again. "What do you want now?" Jinwan stared at him. "Since you think my feelings and all my forbearance are because of the mask on my face, why don't I let you recall what I used to be like tonight?" With that, she leaned over and leaned close to the man's expressionless face. She looked at him with her eyes. "I suddenly missed the days when I could do whatever I wanted. I didn't care about anyone's feelings. I could do whatever I wanted, get whatever I wanted, and abandon whatever I wanted." Then she suddenly fell back and sat on his lap. She put her arms around his neck and smiled at him. I have to fight for what I want. You are the one I want. Why don't you teach me how to take you back? Mo Jingshan looked at her and said, You are the one I want. Why don't you teach me how to take you back? Mo Jingshan slowly furrowed his brows. Childish. With that, he was about to push her away from his lap. However, Jin Wan sat firmly on his lap, raised one hand to hold his neck, and slowly moved one hand up his shoulder. Her two fingers, as if imitating a person walking, slowly moved over the spot on his back, where he had been seriously injured in the car accident to save her. She had just taken a shower before coming here. Other than the faint cold fragrance and the fragrance of the shower gel on her body, there was nothing under the thin summer silk nightgown. She sat on his strong legs with the thin nightgown separating them. Jin Wan smiled at him. She lifted his chin with one hand and moved closer, just a finger's distance away from his lips, their breaths entwined. But they were neither close nor distant. Jin Wan, do you know what you're doing? The man didn't avoid her. He maintained his original posture and looked at her coldly. Jin Wan did not reply. She appeared to be passionate and smiling, but her eyes were cold. I'm sitting on my husband's lap. Is there a problem? The man's eyes were as dark as ink. When she smiled at him again and again, he said coldly, Know your limits. Don't be too willful. The smile on Jin Wan's face grew wider. Willful and reckless. Mo Jingshan stealthily avoided her eyes. Get up. Don't sit here. Jin Wan chuckled and leaned into his embrace. She lay on his shoulder and wrapped her arms around his neck. All right, give me a kiss and I'll get up. Mo Jingshan's gaze was indifferent. He seemed to have seen through her desperation and suddenly pushed her off his lap without mercy. He was very fast, so fast that she was pushed away before she could feel his increasingly obvious reaction. Jin Wan staggered and stepped back. She did not insist. She leaned against the table and watched him for a while. During this time, she did not say or do anything. She only watched him. Then something seemed to fall on the table behind her, and she walked toward the door of the study. When the door opened and closed, Jin Wan had already left without looking back. Mo Jingshan turned to look at the expensive fountain pen she had thrown back onto the table. The sturdy body of the pen had actually been bent by her. On the weekend, Mo Wan's studio finally moved into a new office building. The whole building had more than 20 floors, all of which belonged to the studio. The number of employees had also multiplied. However, because Jin Wan had not applied for a change of the name of the studio, it had not been named after the company, but was still called the studio. During the 3 consecutive days of celebration, various partners sent gifts, and some leaders of partners came to congratulate them. Even several companies that had invested in the studio also expressed their congratulations. Only the Mo Corporation, which had invested $200 million in the Mo Corporation, did not make any move. After the 3 days of celebration, the Mo Corporation suddenly received a sum of money from Mo Wan's studio, $200 million, and the profits and dividends required in the investment contract were transferred into the financial channel of the Mo Corporation overnight. The finance department of the Mo Corporation was in an uproar. They didn't expect that the real estate studio under Jin Wan's name could really make so much money, and it seemed that the real estate industry would continue to rise in the near future. The prices of all the land and buildings under construction that Jin Wan had purchased in large quantities were soaring. It was definitely a new beginning for the domestic real estate industry to make so much money in such a short period of time. However, when she could continue to take the opportunity to invest in large quantities to buy land, her studio suddenly returned the original investment of the Mo Corporation. During this period, Jin Wan did not contact Mo Jingshan again. After receiving the money, Shen Mu was surprised when he received the news. He showed the records of the money to Mo Jingshan. CEO Mo, Mrs. Mo returned the money just like that. She even calculated the interest and everything else according to the original contract. There's no difference at all. This. Mo Jingshan stared at the record of the money for a long time. As soon as they learned that Jin Wan's studio would have a large lack of funds, many investors who had gradually seen the business opportunities in her industry would be eager to fill the gap immediately. Indeed, there was no need to worry that she would be short of funds now. Many investors would only move as soon as they heard the news and try their best to sign a cooperation agreement with her studio. Although Jean Wan valued relationships, once she made a certain decision, she was very straightforward. Her straightforwardness made people wonder if she had made such a plan long ago. But there had been a string hanging on her, and this string had finally broken. The clothes in his office had been removed, and all the clothes she had touched had been removed. Just this morning, he received the room card and key to Aolan International sent by Jean Wan. As a result, not only did she return the key, but she also returned the money invested by the MO Corporation. Chapter 407. After the celebration party, the staff of the studio gathered for dinner near the new office building. Xiao Ba and the others didn't dare to ask more questions after the studio returned the $200 million to MO Corporation's account overnight. Although the studio had a lot of liquid funds under its name, the cooperation with other investors was still going on, but Jean Wan returned the debt to MO Corporation as soon as possible. Well, even if they didn't know what happened, they could tell that something must have happened between Jean Wan and CEO MO. And it must be a big problem. Xiao Ba and other colleagues frequently looked at Jean Wan. The quieter she looked, the more worried they were. Boss, if you are in a bad mood recently, the studio has moved here anyway. There are so many employees and Sister Xia. You can take a break for a while, Xiao Ba said. I'm very happy that the studio has developed independently to this point. How can I be in a bad mood? Jean Wan held a bottle of beer, but didn't drink it. She just shook it in her hand and put it on the coffee table. Xiao Ba wanted to ask more questions, but Xia Tian kept winking at her. Xiao Ba didn't dare to ask more questions, so she took the wine in Jean Wan's hand and gave her a glass of juice. Now our studio is becoming more and more successful. Sister Xia is the vice president, and there are many people in charge of each department. Boss, you need to relax. Why don't we book a ticket for you to travel to City H these days? You can go out for a vacation, okay? Didn't I come back from vacation a while ago? Jean Wan raised her eyebrows. What vacation did you have? Why don't we know? It was the week when I suddenly disappeared. Jean Wan held her chin with her hand, gently touched her cheek with her finger, and said with a faint smile, I secretly went on vacation that week. Jean Wan's expression clearly didn't mean that she had gone on vacation. Xiao Ba and Xia Tian looked at each other. Xia Tian didn't speak, but turned to look at Jean Wan, who didn't say much, and then at her hand. You've been back from the United States for so long, but I haven't asked you about the scar on your hand. Xia Tian pointed at the burn on the back of Jean Wan's hand and wrist that hadn't completely faded. Last time, I accidentally mentioned it, but you didn't say anything. Since then, you've been applying concealer on your hand every day, so I forgot to ask. As she spoke, she pulled Jean Wan's hand over and looked at it over and over again. This scar has been there for a long time. Your skin used to be white and tender, but now it's obviously scalded. When and where did it happen? Why is there such a big scar? It's nothing. I just accidentally scalded myself. Boss, don't apply concealer on your hand in the future. It's better to stick to skincare and scar removal ointment. Fortunately, there's only a little redness. It's not obvious if you don't look carefully. I think it'll disappear after a while. Concealer will affect the healing of scars. Don't use it anymore. Xiao Ba's voice was soft, and she reached out to touch Jean Wan's hand. It must have hurt a lot. Jean Wan looked at her hands and remembered her miserable life. Now that she had finally left that terrible place and returned to High City, it was nothing more than jumping from a strange fire pit into a fire pit she was familiar with. She had been looking forward to returning to High City as soon as possible, but now she was finally back. Jean Wan changed the topic and finally led it to Xia Tian's recent relationship problems. The atmosphere at dinner became lively again because of Xia Tian's awkward relationship experience. Everyone was laughing and joking when Jean Wan's cell phone rang. She picked up the cell phone and looked at the caller ID, picked it up, and said indifferently, "Hello." When she heard what the person on the other side of the phone said, she said calmly, "I see. Jialan Bar in downtown High City. Elegant blues music sounded, and the slow singer in the bar was holding a guitar and singing. Young men and women hugged and caressed on the dance floor, ambiguous and charming. Jinwan walked across the dance floor expressionlessly, wearing the soft white dress she had worn when she left the dinner party. This bar was similar to a combination of a noisy bar and a bar. There were many people, and it was very hot. She took off the matching silk scarf around her neckline and threw it into her bag. Without the cover of the silk scarf, the V-shaped neckline exposed a large area of skin around her snow-white collarbone. Although it was not too naked, it still attracted the attention of many men on the dark dance floor. But her eyes didn't seem to come to such a place to drink and spend the long night. Her cold and indifferent expression attracted people's attention, and she soon walked inside to the place Qin Sighting said on the phone. Qin Sighting said that Mo Jingshan was drunk and called Jinwan to pick him up. Qin Sighting originally wanted to drive away the girl, who had been wandering around their bag. After wandering around for a long time, no one paid attention to her. However, the moment Jinwan appeared, Mo Jingshan, who had been quietly drinking, suddenly pulled the girl who happened to come to his side to sit on the sofa. Although he did not put his arm around the girl's waist, he took the expensive bottle of wine from her hand, opened it personally, and chatted lightly with the girl, who took the initiative to come up to him. Mo Jingshan was clearly not drunk. But if he was not drunk, why would he, who was expressionless and didn't even bother to look at the woman, who took the initiative to court him, now take the initiative to sit down with this woman? Normally, he would never provoke a woman. Even Shuyan had invited him several times, but he had only gone with her once because there was a problem with the counter of one of Shine's brands in the mall. Even then, he had only gone to deal with the problem and dispute at the counter. A man who had no interest in any woman except Jinwan was actually holding a strange bar girl who smelled of cheap, pungent perfume by his side. Was she really going to get a divorce? Qin Sighting was about to ask the bartender, who was about to lean on Mo Jingshan to go away, but out of the corner of his eye, he saw Jinwan coming over from the dance floor with an expressionless face. He raised his hand and was about to drive her away. He was surprised that Jinwan came so fast. Chapter 408. He's not drunk. Why does he need antidote? Jinwan didn't even look at Qin Sighting. She looked past the tall and long-legged Qin Sighting and at the man in the sofa. She glanced at the scantily dressed woman next to him. With just a glance, the woman instinctively sensed the relationship between Jinwan and Mo Jingshan and immediately gave her a provocative look back. Jinwan and Mo Jingshan looked at her. Qin Sighting thought Jinwan would fly into a rage, but she didn't lose her composure. Mo Jingshan didn't seem to be completely sober. Qin Sighting did order a lot of wine here today, but the man's half-drunk appearance made him look colder and lazier. The buttons of his black shirt were undone, and the waitress sitting beside him kept looking at his collar with a fascinated look. Qin Sighting could save people's lives, but he couldn't save the feelings between people. He glanced at Jinwan, who suddenly raised her hand and said abruptly, "Jinwan, if you have anything to say it when we leave here. There are too many people here. Bear with it. Don't be impulsive." She still looked at Mo Jingshan, and then at the scantily clad woman, who kept squeezing against him. Mo Jingshan, the way you humiliate yourself is really eye-opening. I've always learned from others. Do you like to humiliate yourself in this way? Mo Jingshan looked at Mo Jingshan, and then at the scantily clad woman who kept squeezing against him. Mo Jingshan, the way you humiliate yourself is really eye-opening. Hearing Jinwan's words, Qin Sighting raised his eyebrows. In an instant, he saw Jinwan take a step back and unbutton the middle button of her dress in front of Mo Jingshan and him. Her dress had a V neckline, and there was a round button at the bottom of the neckline. She only needed to unbutton one button to instantly turn the intellectual and beautiful white dress into a sexy deep V long dress. The change of one button would faintly reveal the ravine in front of her chest to many people. Qin Sighting turned his eyes away, and Mo Jingshan clenched the glass cup in his hand imperceptibly. His cold eyes looked at Jinwan's movement and instantly darkened. Jinwan did not say much. She only looked at him coldly and indifferently, dragging out her words as she slowly said, "Do you know what it means to be Hai Cheng's #1 socialite?" Seeing that the man's eyes were as dark as ink, Jinwan's face revealed a seductive smile. In Jinwan's eyes, the title #1 socialite was never a compliment. Instead, it was more of a derogatory one. Most of them came from the young masters who had heard of her reputation and met her. But most of them came from the men she had rejected or ignored. The so-called #1 socialite was a beautiful woman who had the ability to seduce men. However, because no one truly understood her, and no one had truly interacted with her for too long, everyone thought that she was probably proud and dissolute deep down. She looked very aloof, but in reality, she was not born with any stable elements. The words #1 socialite contain equal proportions of praise and ridicule. It didn't sound good to Jinwan anyway. This was the impression Jinwan left on everyone. She had sealed that version of herself on the night of her rebirth, but at this moment, she had released it again. Jinwan untied her hair, and the seaweed-like hair that had been tied high behind her spread out like waves behind her back. Jinwan was already eye-catching when she first appeared, and now her movements attracted the attention of countless men. She bent down slightly, and the deep V-neck outlined the outline of her chest in a way that was enough to make people's noses bleed. She picked up a bottle of brandy on the table, poured it into a glass on the side, and then picked up the glass to play with it in her hand. She brought it to her lips and took a sip. Then she blinked and looked at the men behind her in confusion and charm. "Is there some ice in my glass? I'll go get it for you. Waiter, hurry up and bring the ice over. Who is this? I can't believe I see such a beautiful girl in such a place." Jinwan looked at the group of men with a seductive smile, and then gently shook the glass in her hand. Several men grabbed a few ice cubes from the ice bucket in the hands of the waiter, who had just rushed over, and rushed to pour the ice into her glass. One of the men rushed over the fastest, and successfully gave her the ice cubes. Jinwan smiled at him, holding the square glass in one hand, and hooking the man's chin with the other. Her red lips opened slightly, and she said lazily, "Thank you." The man's bones seemed to have softened in an instant. Jinwan bit her red lips again, shook the glass in her hand with a smile, and said slowly, "I can't hold my liquor very well. I don't know how strong this brandy is. After drinking this glass, there shouldn't be any problem, right?" No, you can drink as much as you want. This bottle is only 40 degrees. Wrong. The bottle on the coffee table looks unremarkable, but it's a brandy with more than 50 degrees. Let's not talk about whether it's expensive or not, but this brandy is very strong. Beauty, if you can't hold your liquor well, don't drink it. It's all right, Mississippi. You can drink as much as you want. How about I treat you? More and more men crowded around. Jinwan's face was half seductive and half innocent as she looked at the square glass in her hand. A brandy with such a high degree is indeed rare. It's said that it's not cheap. If I don't try it, it'll be a waste of God's gift. Besides, it's not easy for the girls who go around selling alcohol. Since I've already bought this wine, it'll be disrespectful if I don't drink it." As she spoke, she brought the glass to her lips and took another gentle sip. The wine stain left a bright glow on her lips. As the man had brought in more ice cubes for her, she gently bit one of the ice cubes on the edge of the glass, and gently licked it with the tip of her tongue. At that moment, the sound of inhalation rose and fell. She turned to look at Mo Jingshan, who was sitting on the sofa, and met his heavy, stern gaze. The moment she met his gaze that seemed to be hidden under a thick fog, Jinwan released the man's chin that had been lingering on her fingertips. She turned to support herself with one hand on the coffee table, and leaned down to look at the man who was sitting motionlessly on the sofa. Because of this angle, the curve of Jinwan's chest was even more tempting. Although she did not reveal anything that shouldn't be revealed, it was just right to seduce him. Mo Jingshan's gaze was cold as he watched her. His hand was still holding the square glass. He did not move, but the glass seemed to be on the verge of breaking. Chapter 409. The bar girl sitting next to Mo Jingshan was a little unconvinced, but when she saw Jinwan was bewitching like a demon in these few minutes, she clicked her tongue and didn't dare to challenge her. After all, even if she took off her clothes and stood here, she couldn't achieve the effect that even a woman would be attracted to her. Just now, she came here wearing this and an ordinary dress, but she didn't expect that she could achieve this effect by unbuttoning her hair and changing her smiling face. So beautiful that even women wanted to commit a crime. In fact, the bar girl just wanted to make some money. Although she wanted to cling to the man next to her, she vaguely felt that she couldn't afford to offend this man and that woman. Although the man didn't ask her to go away, he didn't put his arm around her waist or take the initiative to touch her. At this moment, his attention was completely focused on that beauty. The bar girl slowly backed away from him, lowered her head, and quietly ran away. Jinwon noticed this scene, but the smile on her face didn't change. Her purpose was not to drive that woman away, but to embark. Jinwon attracted a group of men who rubbed their hands and looked at the man sitting quietly on the sofa with a faint smile. Embark, it's just a divorce, isn't it? Jinwon opened her mouth. Her voice was filled with the smell of brandy and the chill of ice. She spoke slowly, but everyone around her could hear her clearly. If I agree to sign the divorce papers tomorrow, does it mean that it has nothing to do with you if I'm taken away by anyone here tonight? Jinwon said and took another sip of wine. She didn't drink as freely and passionately as those women who often drank, but this kind of behavior aroused the interest of many men. Jinwon's long hair flowed down her back like a waterfall, and the skin of her collarbone and chest was as white as jade in the light, tempting people to come forward and touch her. She was so beautiful. When those men heard that she was about to be divorced, they immediately stared at her like wolves and tigers. It was as if she became a woman who had been abandoned outside of marriage in the next moment, someone would pounce on her and take her away in the next moment. Such a night was too enchanting, and such a woman was too seductive. The surrounding blues music did not stop, so no one heard clearly the name Jinwon had called the man on the sofa. No one heard the 3 words embark. The man on the sofa sat in the middle of the booth. This was a relatively quiet booth in the bar. The lights were dim, and the man's expression was hidden in the darkness. The people around him could not see it clearly either. Divorce? She's so beautiful, and there's actually a man who's willing to give up on her? Leave. Leave quickly. If we divorce today, we'll take you to get our marriage certificate tomorrow. Whistles and teasing sounds came one after another. The atmosphere around embark gradually became more and more hazy, and the coldness in his eyes gradually became colder. Jinwon straightened up in front of the booth with a smile, and no longer looked at him. She raised her head, drank up the whole glass of wine, and casually threw the glass to the ground. The sound of the glass shattering was like a switch, causing the man's seemingly calm brows to slowly furrow. Jinwon turned around and raised her hand to wave her soft long hair behind her back. The sensation caused by this small corner of the bar was probably noticed by the lighting technician. As she walked onto the dance floor alone, the lights on the dance floor went out one by one because of her movements, leaving only the darkest one. As she spun on the dance floor with her hair and long skirt flying, the lights became brighter bit by bit at a very slow speed, and as she spun faster and faster, the brightness of the lights also increased at the same speed. She was already a dazzling existence. All of a sudden, she no longer hid and ignored her beauty and suddenly shone in the crowd. Under the lights, she was like an elf breaking out of the ground. Every time she spun, the hem of her long skirt would fly up, and her slender, white legs would be exposed. Countless men were attracted one by one, and whistles came one after another. Jinwon simply spun her skirt. Her dress was not very revealing, but her eyes were extremely charming. She performed such a lingering and moving visual effect, and the atmosphere in the whole bar was ignited. Someone entered the dance floor and handed her a glass of wine. Jinwon took it with a smile. When all the lights gathered on her, she raised the wine in the glass and splashed it up. She raised her head, looked at the dripping wine, and then closed her eyes, letting it fall on the top of her head. The wine rolled down along her hair bit by bit. It was not enough to wet her hair. Wherever the wine fell on her white skirt, that part would become translucent. This glass of wine was too little in the eyes of those men. In an instant, Countless people handed her the wine. Jinwan smiled and spun to a man's side. As she took the wine glass, she deliberately pulled the man's arm and spun around. When the man couldn't help but put his arm around her waist, she spun out of his arms. Although she didn't let the other party touch her, all the men around felt their hearts itch when they saw this. Jinwan didn't say anything. Jinwan's dance was casual and hot. It was too hot here. Sweat had slid down her neck and slowly rolled into her deep V-neck, making people's imagination run wild. Her white skin looked more charming in the light. Her long black hair, which reached to her waist, swayed back and forth. Sweat soaked her black hair, but it didn't affect her beauty at all. Instead, more men in the bar rushed in this direction and surrounded her in the center of the dance floor. Jinwan splashed the wine up again. When the wine splashed over her, the material of her back was soaked, and the dress, which had become translucent because of the wet, outlined the outline of her back. All the men and women's eyes were on her, but Jinwan's eyes were looking in the same direction from beginning to end. Even though the crowd was very dense, she could still see that man through a small gap in the crowd. More and more people came around. The dance floor became hotter and hotter, and she sweated more and more. She didn't take any more wine. Her sweat had soaked her dress, and the material of her chest was soaked bit by bit. Her clear skin seemed to be covered with a layer of light because of the sweat, which made her more attractive. Chapter 4:10. The man didn't expect that the beauty on the dance floor would invite him, and immediately wanted to go in with an excited look. However, before he could approach Jinwan, a black figure had entered the crowd. When Jinwan was still crooking her finger at the man, his sharp eyes pierced the man's face like a cold sword. When the people around saw the tall and cold figure coming in, they were confused until a sharp-eyed person in the crowd suddenly said, "Mo?" This Jialan bar was frequented by many rich people in High City. Even if not everyone could recognize Mo Jingshan, at least some people who had seen him or cooperated with him could recognize him. For a moment, the crowd suddenly fell into a strange silence, and some people who recognized him subconsciously stepped back. The man who had just been seduced by Jinwan came over. Before he could touch Jinwan's hand, his wrist was suddenly caught. That person was stunned for a moment. He only heard a cold word, "Scram." Before he could react, he was pulled back by a vice president of a company behind him. The vice president directly pulled him away from the battlefield in order to avoid being affected by the battle. The man was not reconciled. There were so many people on the dance floor, but the beauty only waved to him. He was about to go back when he heard the vice president say nervously, "That is the president of Mo Corporation. How many brains do you have? How dare you snatch his woman?" Jinwan didn't stop, and was about to continue crooking her finger at the others on the other side. Anyway, there were still some people who didn't recognize him, and were about to approach her because of her smile and frown. However, in the exclamation of the crowd, Mo Jingshan directly clasped Jinwan's hand and took her away expressionlessly. Jinwan didn't resist or struggle. When she was taken out of the crowd, she staggered, which showed how strong Mo Jingshan was. She turned to look at Qin Sighting, who came over. Qin Sighting glanced at her and gave her a look that told her to take care of herself. However, she curled her lips into a smile. She turned back and smiled in the direction of the crowd. The moment the group of men whistled behind her, she felt the bones in her wrist, which was already very heavy, almost being crushed. Her entire body was violently pulled forward, and she almost hit the man's shoulder. Jinwan couldn't see Mo Jingshan's expression. She only knew that his grip was strong, and that she could barely keep up with his footsteps. She was dragged away from the crowd. When they reached a place with fewer people, he took her into an empty bathroom and slammed the door shut. Then in the next moment, she was suddenly pressed against the door by the man, and her back hurt from the impact. Her face only paled for a moment before she raised her head to look at the man's dark and cold face. "What? Wasn't he indifferent? You're already angry?" Jinwan leaned against the door and in the man's arms. Being restrained by him, she had no intention of escaping or avoiding him, but just looked at him with a thin smile. She didn't need to look carefully to know that this was a men's bathroom. However, the customers that Jialan Bar usually entertained were all extraordinary, so even this bathroom was clean, and there was even a faint smell of sandalwood wafting in the air. But the first thing she smelled was the faint smell of alcohol, and the familiar smell of grass on the man's body as always. She was still smiling softly, as if she wasn't provoking him. Her face, which usually had no offensive power, was suddenly so beautiful that it seemed to be full of offensive power. Her unique beauty made the man's usually calm eyes freeze for a moment. Looking into his eyes, Jinwan shook off his hand that was imprisoned on her wrist without fear, and at the same time, put her two slender arms around his neck, pressed her body against his chest, and smiled casually. Mo Jingshan, if you have the ability, continue to be indifferent. I really can't compare with you in terms of ruthlessness or means. I can only compete with you to see who can ruin themselves more. If you like to play this game, I'll play with you. The man narrowed his eyes coldly and looked at her closely with her arms around his neck. You're very bold. How dare you come to such a place to make trouble? It's just a drink and a dance. Am I really too far away from those men who covet me? I was too obedient in the past. You told me to stay away from those men, so I stayed away. I'm so obedient that I didn't even accept flowers from other men. But I didn't even accept the flowers that other men gave me. Now that you can casually pull a woman who sells alcohol to sit next to you, can't I invite a man who is interested in me to dance with me? Jinwan smiled as she spoke. She looked up at him with her arms still wrapped around his neck. She leaned close to his lips to speak, but the smile in her eyes was cold. After the divorce, I have nothing to do with you. What can you do to me? Part of her dress was translucent, and her hair was wrapped around her neck. The faint cold fragrance of her body, mixed with the smell of brandy, soon occupied part of the air in the bathroom. When Jinwan spoke, she deliberately leaned against his lips. The man suddenly pinched her chin with a strength that almost hurt her. Jinwan still had a fearless smile on her face. Mo Jingshan, if you have the ability, strangle me here. The look in his eyes was that he really wanted to strangle her to death. But he restrained himself. Jinwan clearly saw his restraint, just like how he usually did things. This man's restraint was too strong. No matter in any aspect, he could hide all his thoughts and emotions without revealing anything, so that no one could know what he was thinking or what he was going to do. He suddenly let go of her and took a step back, no longer touching her, and his eyes returned to their original calmness. Jinwan, you can't change the trajectory of life just because you want to. What you should do is to go back to the beginning. His tone was indifferent and his eyes were calm. Jinwan smiled. As the man continued to take a step back, she suddenly stepped forward and grabbed the collar of his shirt, catching him off guard, or taking advantage of the fact that he didn't intend to do anything to her. She dragged him over and pushed him hard against the wall. She pressed him hard against the wall, grabbed the collar of his shirt tightly, and imitated him to imprison him. Chapter 4:11. Jinwan didn't answer, but just looked at the man close to her. When her face approached him, he frowned coldly, and his eyes were full of warning. She pressed him down with both hands. Even though she knew she couldn't hold him down, she still did so. She kept looking at his face, as though she hadn't seen him up close for a long time, and wanted to see if he was really Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan looked at her, his calm eyes unfathomable and emotionless. He said indifferently, "Don't let what happened tonight happen again. The Ji family can't protect you now. If you keep messing around like this, you'll be the only one who suffers." How could he be afraid of her suffering? Jinwan laughed again, and suddenly let go of his shirt collar. She didn't tidy up her messy dress, or the hair tangled around her neck. She just raised her hand to turn the door handle with a sneer, and abruptly opened the bathroom door. When she looked up, she saw Qin Sighting, who had been standing outside for a long time. The cigarette in Qin Sighting's hand had not been burned out. Seeing Jinwan coming out like this, he raised his eyebrows. Jinwan glanced at him indifferently, and walked past him without saying a word. The bar was still noisy. Jinwan walked through the crowd. The men who had coveted her were looking for other targets on the dance floor. Suddenly seeing her walking out alone, two of them immediately followed her. However, before they could get close, they were suddenly stopped by two bodyguards in black. They watched the beauty walk out just like that. The two bodyguards looked regretful and sad, but the two bodyguards in front of them didn't look like they were easy to provoke, so they really didn't dare to offend them directly. The two bodyguards immediately went to the door and pointed in the direction Jinwan left. When Mo Jingshan came out, the bodyguard whispered, "Madam went into the hotel ahead and hasn't come out for a while." Mo Jingshan didn't speak. When Qin Siding walked out casually, he glanced at him indifferently. Qin Siding was expressionless. "Don't look at me. It's not like she's my woman. I can't care if she just wants to stay in the nearest hotel for a night, or climb up to the rooftop of the hotel to commit suicide. After all, this hotel," he looked up and said expressionlessly, "is indeed quite high." Furthermore, Qin Siding continued expressionlessly, "Although this hotel is a 5-star one, it is near a street of bars. There are probably all sorts of people inside. Jinwan went and dressed like that and swayed after drinking a little. If she was dragged into the room by someone, no one would know." Mo Jingshan coldly stared at him. He did not speak, and turned to look at the two bodyguards by the door. The bodyguard hesitated and said, "Mr. Mo, it's not convenient for us to enter Mrs. Mo's room." With Jinwan's current state, she did not wish to return to the Yu Garden. She did not want Auntie Chun to see her like this and become anxious. Or, she might as well call Grandfather Mo over. She did not want to go anywhere. After leaving the bar, she went straight to the hotel across the street. She went in and booked a room. She took the room card and entered the elevator. Under everyone's curious gaze, she entered her room like a wandering ghost. When she entered the door and turned on the lights, she did not pay attention. She turned on the air conditioner as well. Her clothes reeked of alcohol. She frowned and went straight into the bathroom. She entered the bathroom and turned on the shower. In order to wake herself up, she turned on the cold water and took a shower. She only showered for a few minutes. She just wanted to wake herself up. She had just turned off the water and wrapped the towel around her body. Before she could dry her hair, she heard the door open. Was there a problem with the hotel's security? Why would someone else open the door to her room? Jinwan poked her head out and immediately met the man's gaze. That's right. Only her legal husband would have the ability to enter her room in the hotel without a hitch. Mo Jingshan saw the towel on her body and her long hair still dripping with water. He walked in, put a bag of clothes and the supper he bought downstairs on the table nearest to the door, and threw the long white dress she had thrown outside the bathroom into the trash can. Mo Jingshan took a look at the towel on her face and put it on the table. "I thought you would send someone else to see if I ran to the rooftop to commit suicide, or lay on the balcony or something." Jinwan returned to the bathroom to take out a towel. She came out while drying her hair. Then she leaned against the bathroom door and looked at the man's silent, cold face. "I didn't expect you to come in person." Mo Jingshan took a look at her, saying, "You're not the kind of person who is irrational. You should calm down after venting. There's no need to do such a wrong thing and let others worry about you too much." Jinwan blinked to clear the mist in her eyes. She looked at the man with clear eyes. "Mo Jingshan, am I very strong in your eyes? Can I bear to be hurt and hit by you over and over again? At least you're not weak." Jinwan lowered her eyes. Her voice was indifferent, as if she had no emotion. "Is there anything else you want to say to me?" Mo Jingshan didn't speak. "Or, you've been waiting for the moment I give up for so long that you have nothing to say to me, right?" The man's voice was still calm and emotionless. "Yes." Jinwan smiled. "We agreed that we wouldn't divorce. We agreed that there would be no separation between life and death. It turns out that I really loved you too much. Now that things have come to this, it's a separation between life and death." Mo Jingshan looked at her clear, cold eyes and said indifferently, "You can take it that the Mo Jingshan you love has died in that car accident. The current me is no longer the Mo Jingshan you are familiar with." Jinwan's pupils constricted. She stared at him motionlessly. She stared at his face, and then slowly blushed. She froze for a long time before saying word by word, "Mo Jingshan, You're really an executioner who can completely feel all the veins in my body. You can easily control my weakness and know how to make me completely desperate. Mo Jingshan looked at the corners of her red eyes. His figure was imprinted in her eyes, but it was gradually dyed red. The man's eyes seemed calm and warm, but because of this calmness, they appeared particularly cold and cruel. She looked at this man and felt all the pain that had been accumulating in her heart for a long time, piercing into her heart like thousands of arrows piercing through it. It was densely packed, thin and sharp. All the pain covered her senses, making her feel so painful that she almost couldn't breathe. Chapter 412. 10 months or 10 years. It didn't make any difference to her. She always knew that Mo Jingshan would always be Mo Jingshan. Whether in these 10 months or 10 years, he would still be Mo Jingshan. He was the man she had let down. He was the man she was so familiar with. But in an instant, he had become so distant from her. He was so strange. She looked at his eyes, which were calm and clear. He didn't deliberately look cold and distant, but he was extremely cold. Jinwon couldn't cry. Her eyes were bloodshot. She looked at him with all the emotions in her eyes. All the despair and calmness attacked her. She clenched his collar tightly. Mo Jingshan, let go of me in the name of death. You can do it. You are so cruel. Jinwon, don't call my name. Her voice was very light and a bit determined. Aren't you dead? You're dead, aren't you? Mo Jingshan, from today on, I'll take you as dead. He did not answer, nor did he deny it. He only looked at her eyes that were on the verge of collapse. The indifference and heavy mist in his eyes made her sneer instantly. Get out, she said. He looked at her. I told you to get out. His eyes quietly and slowly entwined with her cold and hate-filled eyes. Mo Jingshan, you actually never really loved me. You're too calm. You know what you should do and what you shouldn't do. You know how to love and pamper me. You know how to be good to someone, but you never lose control. Just like now, you can completely calmly tear me into countless pieces. Jinwon was so angry that she looked at him with a smile. The scariest people are those who know how to restrain themselves. The only person you trust is yourself. You never completely trust anyone else. You think everything you do is right. No matter what the reason or the situation is, you are right. Mo Jingshan didn't speak. He stood tall and straight in silence. His eyes were clear and sharp, and the coldness seemed to penetrate her skin and into her bones and blood. Jinwon closed her eyes and pointed to the closed door. Either you get out, or I get out. He looked at the emotions in her eyes and did not move. Jinwon abruptly lifted her feet to walk out. However, when she passed by the man, he grabbed her wrist. I'm leaving. The man's voice was as calm as ever. The door opened and closed, and the room returned to its original tranquility in an instant. However, standing by the bathroom door, Jinwon could only hear her own heart pounding, pounding, pounding. The next morning, Jinwon woke up with a start. She felt like she was suddenly kidnapped by someone. She covered her nose and mouth, unable to breathe. Then, those people locked her in a car and threw her into a very, very cold place. She was surrounded by snowy mountains, and it was cold everywhere. She was frozen stiff, and her limbs couldn't move. All she could see was a vast expanse of whiteness, and she couldn't see any other colors. It's very cold. The snowy mountain turned into a glacier bit by bit, and she was frozen on top of the glacier. It was as if someone had raised an ice arrow and aimed it at her heart, and with a swoosh it shot towards her. No. Jinwon abruptly woke up from her dream. The moment she woke up, she felt heavy and weak all over, and her head was so heavy that she could barely sit up. With great difficulty she sat up in bed. The feeling of being filled with lead made it difficult for her to raise her hand to touch her hair. It was very cold, unbearably cold. Could it be that the dream could affect one's perception? Or was she trapped in the dream and hadn't woken up yet? Jinwon closed her eyes and sat on the bed for a while. Then she lifted the quilt and got out of bed, wanting to go to the bathroom to take a hot bath. As soon as she walked into the bathroom, she seemed to catch a glimpse of the number 16 degrees displayed on the air conditioner next to her. However, her mind was a mess, and she couldn't figure out what was going on. She walked straight in. It was too cold. Shivering, She sat on the edge of the bathtub, filled the bathtub with hot water, and unbuttoned her clothes with cold hands trembling. When the water was almost full, she stepped into the bathtub and shivered hard. Sitting in the pool of hot water, she felt warm all over. It had been raining in High City for 2 whole days, and the CEO's office of the Mo Corporation was also overcast. Shen Mu had always been familiar with CEO Mo's temperament, so he was very careful in his work, and had almost never made a mistake. However, in the past 2 days, he had received frequent cold looks from CEO Mo. He had a feeling that he would soon lose his job. Auntie Chen had called the company from the Yu Garden yesterday. Before Shen Mu had time to say anything, he was sent to a partner company in High City for an inspection. He didn't dare to say a word. When Shen Mu came back, it was already the afternoon of the next day. He was usually very cautious in his work, and it was rare that he forgot about Auntie Chen's call because of his busy work schedule. When he received Auntie Chen's call again, it was almost time to get off work the next day. Special Assistant Shen, why can't I get through to Mr. Mo's phone? Yesterday, I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure how serious the matter was. But until now, I haven't heard from Mrs. Mo for 2 whole days. I'm afraid something has happened. Hearing this, Shen Mu suddenly remembered that Auntie Chen had called him yesterday and said that she had something to talk to COMO about. After hanging up the phone, he hurried to the conference room. The meeting had ended at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but several department heads were still explaining other things to COMO, so they hadn't come out yet. Shen Mu waited outside for a while and took a look at the time. Thinking of Auntie Chen's anxious tone just now, he simply pushed the door open, walked quickly to Mo Jingshan's side, and whispered in his ear, "COMO. The Yu Garden called and said that Mrs. Mo hasn't heard from her for 2 days. Auntie Chen sounded very worried. I don't know what happened." Mo Jingshan paused and turned to look at Shen Mu. "When did she call?" "Yesterday, but I was temporarily sent to an inspection and forgot to tell her. Just now, Auntie Chen called again, so I..." Mo Jingshan looked at the document in his hand, hesitated for a few seconds, and finally put it down, saying coldly, "Pause for now. Report it tomorrow." The department heads in the conference room looked at each other, but no one dared to ask why. Chapter 413. Mr. Mo, you don't come back every day, and Madam is getting thinner by the day. If this situation continues, I'm afraid I won't be able to keep it a secret. Elder Mo has always thought that the 2 of you are fine. If something happens to Madam, I won't be able to take responsibility. After hanging up, Mo Jingshan suddenly recalled that night 3 days ago, in the hotel opposite Jialan Bar. Jin Wan was still awakened by the cold. She did not know how she had fallen asleep in the bathtub, nor how long she had slept for. She only felt that her entire body was cold. She instinctively felt that she could not continue sleeping here. She raised her hand and tried to hold onto the edge of the bathtub to get out of the water. However, waves of cramping pain came from her calf. The pain was sudden and sharp, causing her to tremble in the water. It was so painful that her entire body was stiff, as though she did not have the strength to move. How long exactly had she slept here? Why was it so cold? Her fingers moved in the water. They felt numb. She wanted to turn her head to look for her phone, but she remembered that her phone and bag were placed by the bed. She had no choice but to raise her hand with great difficulty to continue holding on to the edge of the bathtub. However, the intense pain in her leg left her with no strength to even cry out, much less raise her hand. With great difficulty, she managed to raise her 5 fingers before returning them to their original position. Just the act of raising her fingers seemed to have consumed all of her strength. So cold, the pain in her leg came without warning, but bit by bit, it tore at her nerves. It was as though if not for the sudden cramping pain in her leg, she would not have woken up at all. Jin Wan's head was very dizzy. What surged forward was the boundless fear and loneliness in the darkness. She felt as though she was about to fall into an endless abyss, but there was nothing she could hold on to. This hotel was very luxurious. The bathrooms were air-conditioned, and the air was very cold. Jin Wan could no longer get up. She leaned against the water, her towel hanging on a nearby shelf. She looked at the distance of only 1 or 2 meters and felt that it was very strenuous. The pain in her calf came one after another. It was so painful that her entire body was convulsing. When she lowered her head, she could see the blue veins on her calf twitching. It was indeed a cramp. After sitting in the water for a long time, she finally realized that the water was actually cold. How long had she slept here? It was clearly warm before she fell asleep. Even if she wanted to get up now, she couldn't. She stared at the temperature displayed in the air conditioner on the wall. In a daze, darkness once again occupied the nerves that were barely awake because of the throbbing pain in her calf. All the clear senses gradually became blurred, and she fell into darkness. No one answered Jinwan's call again and again. Mo Jingshan walked to the door of the room where Jinwan lived. His cell phone was still dialing. When he approached, he heard the familiar ringtone inside, but no one answered it for a long time. Open the door. He subconsciously grabbed the phone and ordered in a deep voice. The room service staff hurriedly took the room card and went to open the door. As she swiped the card, she explained, "Before this lady checked in, she specifically told us not to go in and disturb her. So we didn't go in for the past 2 days. Moreover, she paid enough room fees so we..." Mo Jingshan ignored her. The moment the door opened, he had already walked in. The moment the door opened, the cold air in the room was enough to cause all the hair on one's body to stand on end. This was an ordinary-sized room. With one glance, he could see the bottom of the room. Jinwan's figure was not on the bed. There was only a cell phone and a bag. The man's tall and straight figure directly walked into the bathroom. The cold air in the bathroom was even more bone-chilling. Mo Jingshan's heart thumped. An ominous feeling instantly grew stronger. He turned his eyes to see Jinwan lying in the bathtub with a pale complexion and purple lips. She just lay quietly in the water, motionless. "Aya, what's going on?" The room service staff was a middle-aged woman. The moment she entered, she felt the cold air in the room. She turned to see the scene in the bathroom and subconsciously cried out. Mo Jingshan immediately leaned over to help Jinwan up. Thankfully, the design of the bathtub was more user-friendly. There was a support point for her head to lean against. Otherwise, she would have fainted and drowned in the water. Jinwan. The moment the man helped her up, he felt the coldness of her body. It was so cold that it seemed as though she was already dead. There was no warmth at all. Chapter 414. The room service staff hurriedly nodded in panic and ran out to make a phone call. Before he carried her out of the bathroom, he turned off the air conditioner in the room and carried her to the bed. He raised his hand to touch her face. It was still hot. Mo Jingshan picked up Jinwan, who was dripping wet, and carried her out of the bathroom. If Jinwan had been in the bathtub 2 days ago, it meant that she had been soaking in the cold water for 2 whole days. The woman's body seemed to have been frozen stiff, except for the burning heat on her face, which proved that she was still alive. Everything else was unusually quiet. Mo Jingshan put his hand on her neck and looked at her pale, bloodless face. For a moment, he stiffly held Jinwan. The woman seemed to have no signs of life. He could only feel a very weak pulse on her neck, but it was so weak that it seemed that it would stop in the next second. He mechanically hugged her and wrapped the blanket around her. His palms rubbed against her palms in vain, trying to warm up her cold body, even if it was just a little bit. He did not dare to get close to her breath, fearing that he could not feel any breath except for the pulse on her neck. The ambulance rushed over, and the medical staff rushed in with the hotel staff. The doctor checked Jinwan's body and anxiously asked the others to carry her into the car and send her to the hospital immediately. They could not waste a second. In the ambulance, the medical staff were busy, and Mo Jingshan sat by the stretcher bed. In his impression, Jinwan loved to take baths, and often liked to fall asleep in the bathtub. He was always worried that if she fell asleep in the bathtub, she might catch a cold or drown if something happened to her. She had been frozen when she was a child, and her body was still cold, so she was very afraid of the cold. She liked to snuggle into his coat in winter and lean against his arms to keep warm. When she slept, she liked to snuggle against him when it was cold, squirming in his arms and looking for the warmest position to sleep. What he was most worried about suddenly became a reality overnight. At this moment, Jean Wan was lying quietly and motionless, her hands hanging by her sides without any reaction, and her body was not warm at all. The doctor was doing all kinds of emergency measures and kept urging the driver to hurry up. The ambulance rushed from the hotel to the hospital and was sent directly to the emergency room. When Qin Sighting heard the news and rushed over, the first person he saw was Mo Jingshan. When he fell down, Jean Wan was still in the emergency room, and there was a red light on the door. Qin Sighting glanced at the time and frowned. How long has she been in there? When the nurse at the side saw that Dr. Qin had actually come down personally, her expression was just as ugly. She immediately replied with a fearful expression, "He's been in there for 20 minutes. The patient was soaked in low-temperature air and cold water for a long time, causing a high fever of 40 degrees, coupled with insufficient blood supply to the brain. When he was sent here, he was already in severe shock and convulsions. His breathing and heartbeat are very weak. We don't know how he'll be at the moment, but when Dr. Qin was in another operating room, the director had already sent Dr. Chun and Dr. Su in." Qin Sighting didn't say more. He took a look at Mo Jingshan and knew the seriousness of the matter from his expression. He turned to make a call, applied for permission from the director of the emergency room, and went straight into the emergency room. Qin Sighting and the other two doctors walked out. Qin Sighting did not say anything. When Mo Jingshan looked at him, he nodded at him and turned to change his clothes. Dr. Su walked out to say, "Mr. Mo, our hospital has Mrs. Mo's past medical records. Earlier, during the emergency treatment, we took some time to check." Dr. Su walked out and said, "Mr. Mo, Mrs. Mo's past medical records are all available in our hospital. Just now during the emergency treatment we took some time to check. Mrs. Mo has a cold uterus and just experienced a traumatic abortion a few months ago. Her physical condition has always been very weak, and it seems like she hasn't had much time to recuperate. Her high fever in itself is very dangerous, and she was also soaked in cold water for a long period of time. When she was sent to the hospital, her convulsions were really very dangerous. Luckily, Dr. Qin has a good understanding of all aspects of her condition. With Dr. Qin's participation, our emergency measures were very successful. Currently, her fever has already subsided, and her limbs are no longer cramping and convulsing. However, it's already dark now. It's best if someone stays in her room at night to prevent another high fever or other situations." At this moment, Jean Wan had already been pushed out. Mo Jingshan's gaze landed on Jean Wan, who was still deep asleep on the bed. Dr. Su did not say more. He turned back to speak with Qin Sighting for a while and nodded at him. He then had the nurses move Jean Wan to her room. In the room, Auntie Chen rushed to the hospital to take care of her after receiving the news. It was not until midnight that Auntie Chen went to the nurses' break room to sleep. Mo Jingshan stood by the window, his back facing everything in the room. He stood tall and cold, as though he was aloof from the world. No one knew what he was thinking about. This was the scene Qin Sighting saw when he pushed open the door. He walked in. Jean Wan is fine. Although she has a high fever, it didn't develop into pneumonia. This means that her physical condition is not bad. It's just that she's afraid of the cold. After all, it's an old problem. Although her condition was critical when she was sent to the emergency room, compared to when you were sent to the hospital in Los Angeles covered in blood, this is nothing. Even you can endure it. She won't have any problems. Don't worry too much." Qin Sighting's voice broke the deathly silence. The man by the window remained silent. Seeing that Jean Wan was still sleeping, Qin Sighting walked over to pick up the thermometer to test her temperature. After seeing that she did not have a fever after being resuscitated, he placed the thermometer back into the pocket of his white coat and turned to look at the man standing by the window. "Ever since you came back from America, you haven't had a single normal day. We've been brothers for so many years, but I really can't understand it. You clearly love Jean Wan to an extent that no one can compare to, yet you insist on pushing her so far away. It wasn't easy for you to come back from the gates of hell. Can't you just live a normal life? Why must you get a divorce? Must you torture a good relationship to such a state? Qin Sighting glanced at Jinwan as he spoke. He saw that her eyes were tightly shut. She had really been sleeping and could not hear their conversation. His heart softly sighed. What does it matter if I really love her to an extent that no one can compare to? Mo Jingshan's voice was very mild, and the indifferent curve of his lips was almost invisible. His eyes were calm and indifferent, as though the person who carried Jinwan into the ambulance during the day was not him. The large room in the ward became cold and silent because of his voice. Chapter 4:15. Qin Sighting could feel the bone-chilling coldness from his words. He turned to look at him. Others might not understand, but how could Jinwan not understand? She persevered for so long, because she didn't believe that you would be heartless just because you said so. How could she believe that you wouldn't love her just because you said so? Mo Jingshan turned to look at the woman lying on the bed whose face was pale, as though she did not have any breath of life. Towards her, it does take some effort. So step by step you bullied her until she became like this? Mo Jingshan only listened and did not respond. Qin Sighting suddenly thought of something. What did you say to her? After so long, I saw that she was still lively. No matter what she did, at least she had a goal. Why did she suddenly become so depressed in one night? Mo Jingshan looked out of the window expressionlessly. There was no reply, because he said that Mo Jingshan was already dead. Was he really dead? The ward was very large, spacious, empty and silent. The silence made one panic. Jinwan fainted for 2 days, and slept in the hospital for another 2 days. However, she was not completely asleep. She would wake up occasionally, but the time she woke up was relatively short. Not long after opening her eyes, she would fall asleep again. Finally, on the 3rd morning, when she woke up, she walked out of her muddle-headed state. However, her throat was so sore that it felt as though it was filled with sand. When she opened her eyes, she saw Auntie Chen, Xia Tian, and Xiaoba were all in the ward. It was the same as when she slept and woke up. At that time, she seemed to have seen Auntie Qin, who was a servant of the Ji family. It turned out that in the few days she slept, everyone she was familiar with had come to the hospital. You're awake? Xia Tian was still talking to Xiaoba when she suddenly noticed that Jinwan's eyes were half open. She immediately reached out to touch her head. How long do you plan to stay awake this time? Are you going to continue sleeping? You didn't have a fever these 2 days. Don't tell me you're going to sleep for so long. Jinwan did not close her eyes. She quietly watched her for a long time. Xia Tian waved her hand in front of her eyes. Hey my ancestor, don't sleep too much these 2 days. Dr. Qin said that you only had a high fever. It can't be that bad, right? Jinwan closed her eyes again, and then opened them again, saying hoarsely, stop shaking. If you keep shaking, I'll really fall asleep again. Hearing Jinwan's words, Xiaoba and Auntie Chen rushed over from the side. You're awake? Are you really awake? Jinwan looked at them, and then at Xia Tian. She had no recollection of how she ended up in the hospital again. However, when she heard Xia Tian mention Dr. Qin, she roughly knew something. She just did not ask. She only remembered that she had taken a shower in the hotel. It was too cold at the time, and she was unwilling to come out of the hot water. Later, she felt that it was too comfortable and fell asleep. Then he woke up with what seemed to be a cramp in his leg. After a while he lost consciousness. He didn't sleep for long, but when he woke up, he was really awake. Boss, you're finally awake. You've been sleeping for 2 days. Xiaoba said beside the bed. When Dr. Qin called us, he said that you were in the hospital, and you were still unconscious. I was scared to death. Auntie Chen smiled. It's good that you're awake. It's fine now that you're awake. In the afternoon, Jinwan had already been awake for several hours. Seeing that she had no intention of sleeping again, Xia Tian finally allowed her to sit up, and allowed Xiaoba to help her shake the bed. While Xia Tian rushed back to the studio because of a call from the studio, Jinwan sent a message to Xiaoba, asking her to bring a document from the bottom drawer of her desk when she returned to the hospital with Xia Tian. Chapter 4:16. It's a document sent from Immo Corporation 2 months ago. I didn't open it. Back then, you were the one who helped me sign for it. You even asked what it was. You should have some impression of it. Oh, I remember now. I'll go look for it. After hanging up, Jinwon calmly looked at the darkened screen of her phone. A moment later, Jinwon called someone else. I've agreed to the plan to expand the studio to London. I'll personally go to London to sign the contract. After making all the arrangements, Jinwon slept for a long time. She slept for more than 24 hours. Auntie Chun was so frightened that she rushed to call Dr. Chin over. In the end, Chin Sighting examined Jinwon and rolled his eyes. I thought something had happened. It's just a nap. What's there to be nervous about? But Madam woke up yesterday. When she woke up, she seemed fine. Why did she sleep for so long? It's just a deep sleep. She'll wake up on her own when she wants to. Chin Sighting retracted his stethoscope and glanced at Jinwon on the bed before turning to leave. Seeing that Dr. Chin had already said so, Auntie Chun could only wait by the bedside. Xia Tian and Xiaoba returned to the studio after a busy day. That night, Jinwon finally woke up. Just as Chin Sighting said, she only slept for a little longer than usual. However, when she woke up, her mental state seemed much better. The moment Jinwon opened her eyes, she saw the sunset glow on the horizon. The window was open, and the air was clean and cool. She held onto the edge of the bed and slowly sat up. Boss, you're awake. The moment Xiaoba entered, she saw Jinwon sitting up on the bed. She rushed over to point at the document by her bedside. Is this what you were talking about yesterday? Jinwon turned to look at it. Yes. What's in it? This package has been sent to you for a long time, hasn't it? When I dug it out yesterday, I found that it hadn't been opened. Xiaoba said as she opened the thermos flask with Auntie Chun, intending to let Jinwon eat something. Did you bring a pen? Jinwon asked. Xiaoba rummaged through her bag and found a ball pen. Yes, but boss, what do you need a pen for? Put it down. You guys go out first. Auntie Chun and Xiaoba looked at each other. Xia Tian was not in the ward now, so they didn't have much idea. Seeing that Jinwon seemed to be fine, they put down the vacuum flask and turned to go out. They closed the door of the ward from the outside. Jinwon pushed aside the blankets and got off the bed. She picked up the package on the bedside table and tore open the seal. She took out the A4 paper inside. On the first page, the words divorce agreement were written clearly and glaringly. She only glanced at the first 4 words and did not look at the contents of the other pages. She turned to the last page, opened the pen that little 8 had placed there, and wrote her name in the female's signature column. There were 2 copies of the divorce agreement. When Jinwon picked up the second copy to sign, Xia Tian pushed the door open and came in. Seeing the word divorce from afar, Xia Tian's eyelids twitched. She abruptly rushed forward, but was still a step too late. Jinwon placed the signed agreement back into the paper bag and resealed it. Are you crazy? Xia Tian asked in disbelief. Send it back for me tomorrow, Jinwon said calmly. Xia Tian rushed to press down on the paper bag by her hand. She turned to look at Jinwon's calm expression. Who was the one who said that she would never divorce Immo Jingshan in this lifetime? What's with this divorce agreement? Why did you sign it? When did you print the divorce agreement? Why do you want a divorce? Jinwon looked at her. The divorce agreement was sent to me by Immo Jingshan some time ago. Xia Tian's expression faltered, as though she understood something from Jinwon's gaze and tone. She slowly moved her hand away from the paper bag. After a long moment, she said, You've been quiet all this time. Is this what you've been holding back on? Jinwon did not answer. She only said, I've agreed to Mr. Zan's suggestion. I'm preparing to go to England. Do you and Xiaoba want to go with me? Xia Tian's breath was stuck in her throat. Let's not talk about your divorce first. But now that the studio has developed to this stage and has just moved to a new location, even if you want more and better opportunities, you can work with BGY or WK. Why must you go so far away to England? Mr. Zand is famous in England's financial world for his devilish hands. He can indeed help you. But if you work with him, you won't be able to return home for a long time. Are you sure you want to give up on these? Jinwon calmly curved her lips. Because if I go to London, I'll be able to earn more from Mr. Zan's side. After all, BGY and WK haven't brought in any foreign investors yet. I'm taking a step ahead now. By the time WK and BGY's performance soars in the country, our studio will have already soared and developed even faster than them. Who said that my goal is only a small studio? Who said that I can only rely on the resources of various large property companies in the country to survive? We can clearly do better than them, can't we? Xia Tian choked. She understood Jinwan too well. At this moment all she could say was, "Must you leave? Is there any reason why I must stay in High City?" Jinwan asked. "Nonsense. It's not like you can't live without a man. You still have me. There's also the Ji family. There are so many people. It's not like I won't return. It's just that a Sino-foreign joint venture needs some time to grow. Coincidentally, I still need you to stay behind to help me oversee the studio in High City. If Xiaoba is willing to leave with me, let her come with me. She can also train. What about Mo Jingshan? Divorce is only a legal formality. Can you really let go of him? Can you really forget him? Of course. He's already dead. What's there to be unable to let go of?" 2 days later, Mo Corporation suddenly received a package from the same city. The sender was Jin Wan, and the recipient was Mo Jingshan. Because Mo Jingshan had gone to a nearby city last night, and would only be able to rush back this afternoon, Shen Mu went to receive the package. Due to his work habits, all packages that appeared in the company had to be checked by Shen Mu first before being delivered to Mo Jingshan. Thus, Shen Mu did not hesitate to open the package. After reading the contents of the package, Shen Mu was stunned. He rushed to give Jin Wan a call, attempting to find some clues from her words. However, she did not have the slightest intention to deny it. Jin Wan's counterattack was swift and merciless. The person she attacked was unable to retaliate at all. Even when Mo Jingshan returned to the company before the sky turned dark, Shen Mu had yet to get off work. He brought the package into his office. "CEO Mo, this is something that Mrs. Mo sent over." Shen Mu weighed his tone. "It's 2 copies of her signed divorce papers." Chapter 417. Seeing his boss's reaction, Shen Mu didn't dare to speak at this moment. He hesitated before asking, "Well, should I leave it here or just ignore it and send it back?" Mo Jingshan looked at the 2 agreements in his hand and threw the pen on the table. "Put it down. Go out first." Shen Mu had to walk to the desk and put down the agreement. Then, not daring to look at CEO Mo's face again, he quickly slipped out. The office was empty and quiet. Mo Jingshan picked up the divorce agreement on the table and glanced at it. Jin Wan's handwriting was very beautiful. It was not the regular hairpin-style small regular script. The slightly connected strokes were elegant and a bit free and easy. It could be seen that she did not hesitate at all when she wrote. Every stroke was very smooth. When Mo Jingshan received the divorce agreement, Jin Wan had been discharged from the hospital. That night, Mo Jingshan returned to the Yu Garden Villa. The servants in the villa were all there, including Auntie Chun. But Jin Wan was nowhere to be seen. From 7 o'clock p.m. to midnight, Jin Wan did not come back. Although she had agreed to the divorce agreement was made by the company's legal department. Now, because she had suddenly returned the investment, several parts of the agreement needed to be changed. In addition to the funds allocated to her studio, the $200 million that had been invested in her studio should also belong to her. After he took over Shine, many companies related to real estate under the Mo Corporation in High City would also be transferred to her name. Jin Wan might have signed the agreement without reading it. Although he was the one who made the divorce happen, he could not let her suffer losses in the future. Auntie Chen urged him to go back to his room to rest several times. "Mr. Mo, when I accompanied Madam out of the hospital, she asked us to come back and help her pack up all her clothes and put them in her suitcase. She will send someone to pick them up in a few days." Auntie Chen sighed. "And Madam also said that she probably won't come back to the Yu Garden." Mo Jingshan seemed not to hear her, and still took a nap on the sofa in the hall on the first floor of the Yu Garden. At 1 o'clock in the morning, his cell phone suddenly vibrated. It was a call from Jinwan. Mo Jingshan did not sleep much. He leaned against the sofa and picked up the phone. Jinwan was probably standing outside. It was very windy in High City tonight. The wind whistled into his ears from the other side of the phone, sending chills down his spine. The night was as cold as water. It was as cold as her voice. Mo Jingshan, I'm not returning to the U Garden. You don't have to wait for me. Sleep early. Mo Jingshan subconsciously sat up on the sofa, asking in a heavy voice, Are you not coming back today or never? Jinwan chuckled, her voice calm. I've even asked Auntie Chen to pack up my clothes. Isn't the answer obvious? You know, I'm a person who either doesn't let go, or once I do, I'll never look back. Mo Jingshan did not speak for a moment. He didn't get to ask her about her plans after the divorce. Whether it was a merciless dagger or an unnecessary concern, she blocked all of them before they could be unsheathed. Jinwan was indeed such a person. When she was persistent, she had the courage to cut off all means of retreat. But when she completely gave up, she learned his decisiveness. She knew how to strike first and leave first. That was good too. At least he had taught her something. Mo Jingshan was silent for a long time and finally said, That's good too. I still have things to do, so I can't talk to you anymore. Mo Jingshan, let's go our separate ways. Jinwan said and was about to hang up. Before she hung up, Mo Jingshan said, The divorce agreement needs to be amended. When you come back and sign it again, you can talk to me about going our separate ways. The woman's voice on the other end of the phone was very light. I don't want anything. I've caused you so much trouble in the past. Now that it's time to say goodbye, I have to pay you back. I've already paid back all your investments. As for the rest, thank you for laying the foundation for me. In the future, I'll be working alone. Time is as precious as money to me, so if there's nothing else, I'll go ahead. Mo Jingshan, your studio is already doing very well. You don't have to work too hard. Jinwan did not speak for a moment and paused. He heard her breathing on the other end of the phone. It was very light and very low, mixed with the sound of the cool wind. Mo Jingshan, I know you're still you. You'll always be you. From the beginning, she clearly knew that he would always be him. Even if he knew about her embarrassing past 10 years, he never left, nor did he die in that car accident. Mo Jingshan was silent for a moment before lightly spitting out 2 words. Is that so? Jinwan said in a voice as soft as when she was by his side. It's late. I won't disturb you anymore. Goodbye. Mo Jingshan. All right. The phone was immediately hung up. Everything was quiet. The day after Jinwan sent the signed divorce agreement to Mo Jingshan, the U Garden was closed. No one could enter, and all the servants were dismissed overnight. Auntie Chen received a large sum of money. She was an old servant of the Mo family. Logically speaking, after leaving the U Garden, she should directly return to the Mo family. But she really felt guilty to grandfather Mo. She was afraid that he would be too shocked to face the news of their divorce. Moreover, because Mr. Mo did not intend to let her return to the Mo family, she planned to return to her hometown. Before returning to her hometown, Auntie Chen went to Emonwan's studio. At that time, Jinwan was in a meeting with the people from England. After the meeting, she saw Auntie Chen waiting outside. Jinwan personally received Auntie Chen, but Auntie Chen did not even sit down or drink tea. She just looked at Jinwan, who was dressed in a professional suit and had a ruddy complexion, as if she had not been hurt at all. After looking at her for a long time, she said, Mr. Mo has closed the U Garden. Now no one can enter. I know. I heard. Auntie Chen originally thought she just came to see Jinwan. After all, after returning to her hometown, she did not know if she would have a chance to see her again. However, seeing Jinwan's calm expression, her eyes immediately turned red. That night, after you spoke to Mr. Mo on the phone, Mr. Mo directly smashed the phone. Jinwan did not speak. That night, none of us dared to go out of the room, but no one could sleep, because Mr. Mo smashed everything that could be seen in the U Garden. The next day, he ordered people to clean up the mess on the ground. The entire U Garden was empty, and there was nothing left. Jinwan's face was expressionless. She gently blew on the tea in the cup, and still did not respond. Mrs. Mo. Chapter 418. The Yew Garden was dismissed, and Auntie Chen returned to her hometown. Elder Mo finally realized what had happened. Xiaoba said that Elder Mo came to the entrance of the studio building early in the morning and said he wanted to see Jinwan. Ever since Jinwan met Auntie Chen, she knew that she couldn't see anyone. Things had already reached a certain point, and she couldn't make things worse. Especially Grandfather Mo, she couldn't see him. The news that Jinwan refused to see Elder Mo spread, but Elder Mo stubbornly refused to leave. The weather was still hot in the morning, but in the afternoon, it suddenly rained heavily. Xia Tian understood why Jinwan refused to see Elder Mo. She and Xiaoba held an umbrella to shield Elder Mo from the rain. Even when it was dark, Elder Mo was still standing there waiting. However, Jinwan asked someone to send down an exquisite velvet box. In the box was the round blue diamond she had always kept in the office drawer. Seeing that she had asked someone to send the blue diamond out, Elder Mo finally left. But he didn't take the blue diamond with him. He asked them to send it back to her. Elder Mo only left her one sentence. This old man. I will live well and live to a ripe old age. I will live until the day Brad is willing to see me. I will guard the position of our Mo family's granddaughter-in-law for you. No one can take it away. Jinwan didn't want to see Elder Mo because she was afraid that she would lose control of her heart. However, even if she didn't see him, the words Elder Mo left her still made her completely defeated. That night, Jinwan got drunk alone in the hotel. She didn't look for anyone. Xia Tian, Xiaoba, and all her friends and colleagues didn't know where she was. She went to the supermarket alone to buy a lot of wine, and called the supermarket staff to send more wine to her room. This was a hotel directly opposite Aolan International and the Mo Corporation building. It was very high and had a balcony. Wearing a long skirt, she sat on the balcony, feeling the cool breeze. Her skirt swayed back and forth, and her feet swayed back and forth. She sat under the night sky of High City, looking at the 18th floor of Aolan International in the distance, where the lights were not turned on all night. Then she seemed to inadvertently look at the top floor of Mo Corporation, where the lights were also not turned on tonight. She felt that many memories were replaying in her mind like a movie. However, after they were replayed one by one, she seemed to have forgotten most of them. He didn't know how much wine he had drunk on the balcony. When he felt that he might fall from the balcony if he continued to get drunk, he reluctantly climbed back to the bed in his room and drank alone against the white wall until late at night. She didn't even know how drunk she was after that. She only knew that she was so drunk that she fell asleep. She didn't know how long she had been drunk, or how long she had slept. Halfway through, Jinwan received Xia Tian's call. When Xia Tian heard that she was drinking, she asked where she was and didn't call her again, considerately giving her some time to be alone. After waking up, she continued to drink. Jinwan didn't eat anything and relied on wine to survive. When she couldn't drink anymore and felt sick to the point of vomiting, she finally threw the wine into the garbage bag and lay on the bed to sleep. When she finally woke up completely, it was the morning of the third day. Jinwan opened her eyes and looked at the fluttering curtains and the sun hanging high in the east outside the window. She got up, walked to the balcony, and looked downstairs at everyone who got up early in the morning to rush to work. She looked at all kinds of people in the world. After staring at it for a long time, she came to her senses and returned to her room. She threw all the bottles of wine out of the room and went to take a shower. She brushed her teeth and washed herself from head to toe. After the smell of the wine had disappeared, she changed into clean and comfortable clothes and walked out. After carrying her bag and leaving the hotel, she passed by a hair salon. Jinwan entered and cut her waist-length hair into a shoulder-length medium-short haircut. As she left the salon, Jinwan tossed her hair and recalled what Feng Ling had said. After cutting her hair short, it was indeed very comfortable. She didn't care about the 3,000 strands of worry. What was important was that it was really relaxing. She went to a nearby vegetarian restaurant to have a full breakfast, and then returned to the studio to resume her normal work in life. A week later, Mr. Zan specially came from England to discuss the joint venture. Mr. Vince of BGY Group was still interested in her and hoped to persuade her to give up the idea of going to England. However, Jinwan still signed a contract with England. Once it was signed, she would probably develop in England for 2 to 3 years after leaving Haicheng. Xia Tian would temporarily take over as the person in charge of Emonwan Studio. However, Xia Tian insisted that she was only managing. If Jinwan dared to not return after 3 years, she would directly take the people from the finance department and leave. At that time, not only would she lose the studio, but her best friend would also run away. She wanted to see where she could go to cry in the future. Anyway, Xia Tian did indeed threaten her like this. After that, there were various preparations for staying in England for a long time. In the end, only Xiao Ba and a few interns who hoped to receive various work training opportunities decided to follow Jinwan to England. Xia Tian would bring a group of veterans from the studio to oversee Emonwan Studio in Haicheng. All these arrangements were settled. These 3 years you really don't plan on coming back. The day before they left for England, the group of colleagues in the studio gathered for another meal. Jinwan was on her period tonight, so she did not drink. Xia Tian asked for a hot water bag from someone in the restaurant and handed it to her. She then watched as Jinwan pressed the hot water bag against her stomach and sat by her side. She casually asked, "If Mr. Zand is willing to let me return, I will definitely come back. However, if the development there is too busy every day and I really can't leave, I can't guarantee that I won't be able to return," Jinwan said. "You're leaving tomorrow. Even now, you don't plan on meeting Imo Jingshan to say goodbye?" "There's nothing to say goodbye to." Jinwan's expression was calm and indifferent. Everything that needed to be said had already been said. After signing the divorce agreement, Jinwan did not see Imo Jingshan again. Indeed, there was no need to see him. She only vaguely heard that Shine Group was about to make a big move. Imo Xiaoza frequently traveled between Haicheng and Los Angeles. The Western financial world and the Chinese business world were all discussing whether Shine was really going to change owners. They wondered if Imo Jingshan, who was already a dark horse in the country, was going to take over Shine Group. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.